She was standing in his bedroom wearing his hoodie. That was the first thing Grayson Hale noticed. Not the scattered papers across every surface, not the soft lamp burning at 11 o'clock at night, not even the fact that Vivian Ashcroft, one of the most powerful women in the country, looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. He noticed the hoodie, faded gray, army issue, with a frayed left cuff he'd never gotten around to replacing. He'd left it hanging on the back of his door 8 months ago when he shipped out. He hadn't thought about it once since then. He thought about it now. She hadn't heard him come in. She was kneeling on the floor beside his bed, holding a piece of paper close to the lamp, reading it back to herself like she was checking for mistakes. Around her, covering the mattress, the nightstand, the hardwood floor and loose drifts, dozens of envelopes, unsealed, unaddressed, unsent. Grayson stood in the doorway for a long moment, not breathing. Then she looked up. The color left her face. The paper slipped from her fingers. She opened her mouth, closed it, and what finally came out was barely above a whisper. "You weren't supposed to see this. If you've made it this far, don't go anywhere. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled." Now let's go back to the beginning. The flight from Nairobi had been 19 hours with a layover in Frankfurt, and Grayson Hale had spent most of it awake, not because he couldn't sleep on planes, but because he'd gotten used to not sleeping. 8 months in a humanitarian deployment does that to a person. Recalibrates the body's sense of safety so thoroughly that stillness starts to feel like a warning sign. Even at 35,000 feet, some part of him kept scanning. He'd been in the Army for 9 years before his honorable discharge. Medic, then combat medic, then the kind of combat medic who got sent to places that didn't make the news because the people running the news didn't want to explain why American military personnel were quietly saving lives in regions with no formal military objective. He'd come home from that with a slight hearing loss in his left ear, a vertical scar along his right forearm from a piece of shrapnel that had no business being where it was, and a daughter named Ellie who had been 4 years old when he shipped out for the last time and 7 when he finally didn't. He'd spent the 3 years after discharge working as a trauma response coordinator for a nonprofit out of Portland, which was a title that mostly meant he drove a beat-up Subaru to hospital ERs at 2 in the morning and helped people who had just survived something terrible figure out what happened next. It was good work, quiet work, the kind that paid poorly and meant something, which had always been the trade Grayson was willing to make. The humanitarian mission had been a one-time thing. That was what he'd told himself when he signed on. 8 months maximum, deploying with a medical team to coordinate trauma care and field training in 3 East African regions that had been hit hard by a wave of internal conflict the previous year. His sister Becca had moved in to care for Ellie while he was gone. He'd set up the automatic bill pay, written out a detailed document about Ellie's routines and food preferences, and the exact way she needed her nightlight angled so the shadow didn't fall across the closet door, and he'd kissed his daughter goodbye at the airport while she held herself together with the dignity of a 7-year-old who had decided she was old enough not to cry in public. She had cried anyway. So had he. In the car on the way back, alone. That had been 8 months and 11 days ago. The cab from PDX dropped him at his building at 11:04 p.m. on a Thursday in late October. He told Becca not to wait up. His original return wasn't supposed to happen for another 2 weeks, and he'd only managed to get out early because of a mission restructuring that freed up 3 of the team members ahead of schedule. He'd made the decision in the field and booked the flight before he could second-guess it, which was usually how he made decisions when it mattered. He hadn't told anyone he was coming back early, not Becca, not Ellie, not Vivian. He wasn't sure why he'd hesitated on that last one. He'd thought about it on the flight, thumb hovering over her name in his contacts, the little round photo of her that she absolutely had not known he'd saved, her looking sideways at something off camera, caught mid-laugh. He'd put the phone away without sending anything. He told himself it was because she was probably asleep. He didn't look too hard at whether that was the real reason. The building was a converted industrial property in the Pearl District, 12 units, high ceilings, exposed brick, the kind of place that had been artists' lofts in a previous decade and was now significantly more expensive than that history suggested it deserved to be. Grayson's apartment was on the 8th floor, Unit 8A. He'd been there 4 years, ever since he and Ellie had needed somewhere to land after his marriage ended in the quiet, exhausted way that some marriages end. Not with fighting, but with two people realizing they had become strangers who shared a mortgage. He took the stairs out of habit. At the 8th-floor landing, he pushed through the fire door and turned right toward his apartment, duffel over one shoulder, a secondary bag hanging off the other, boots quiet on the hallway carpet. He almost didn't notice the strip of light under the door of 8B. Almost. He stopped. 8B was the penthouse-adjacent unit, technically not a penthouse, but marketed as one, slightly larger than the other floor units, with a second bedroom and a private rooftop access staircase that the building's owner had put in during a renovation 3 years ago. It had been empty for as long as Grayson could remember, periodically used as a short-term rental by the management company. He knew who was renting it. He'd known since month 2 of his deployment, when Ellie had mentioned in one of their video calls, very casually, the way children mention things they suspect might be significant, that the nice lady next door had helped her find her library book, and she smells really good, daddy, like flowers, but not annoying flowers. Vivian Ashcroft had moved into 8B approximately 6 weeks after Grayson deployed. He had no evidence that this was anything other than coincidence. The rational explanation was that she'd needed a temporary residence closer to the Ashcroft Industries Portland office, while her permanent place in the city was being renovated. He knew that much from Becca, who had mentioned it with the deliberate casualness of someone trying not to make it into a bigger deal than it was. The building management had confirmed a 6-month lease, extended once. Grayson had chosen not to think too hard about that either. He stood in the hallway now, looking at the light under the door of 8B, and then he looked at his own door, dark underneath it, and he made a decision that he would not have been able to fully explain if pressed. He used the key he still had. Vivian had given him one for emergencies before he left, just in case Becca couldn't be reached. Don't make it weird, Hale. It's just practical. And he opened the door quietly, meaning to check in, meaning to say he was back, meaning to do something normal and simple. What he found instead was not normal or simple. Vivian Ashcroft had not had a graceful 8 months. This was not something anyone at Ashcroft Industries would have recognized. The Vivian who walked into the 34th floor conference room 3 mornings a week was precisely the same Vivian she had always been. Sharp, prepared, the kind of composed that made junior executives sit up straighter without understanding why. She ran a multinational logistics and infrastructure firm worth roughly $4 billion. She had done so since she was 26 years old, stepping into a role that most of her father's board had quietly believed she would fail at. And she had spent the years since then making each of those people feel the specific discomfort of being systematically proven wrong. She was good at control. She had learned it young, the way children who grow up in difficult households often do. As a survival skill first, a professional skill second, and eventually a trait so deeply embedded that she sometimes forgot it was a choice. What she had not been good at in these 8 months was this. She sat on the floor of Grayson's bedroom. She had a key too. Becca had given it to her weeks ago. Also practical. Also not weird. Also just a thing that had happened. And she was reading the letter she'd written in February, the one she'd started 4 times and never gotten right. She'd written it the week after she and Ellie had built a snowman in the small courtyard behind the building, and Ellie had insisted it be wearing a paper army hat, and Vivian had stood there in the cold watching this small, serious child adjust a piece of newspaper on a snowman's head, and she had thought, with a clarity that was almost painful, I have to tell him. When he comes back, I have to just say it. She hadn't said it. She'd written it down instead, which was safer, and then she hadn't sent it, which was safer still. There were 43 letters total. She had counted them earlier tonight, which had struck her even as she did it as a slightly unhinged thing to do. Sitting in her neighbor's bedroom at 9:30 in the evening, counting letters she had written to him over the course of 8 months and never mailed, wearing his hoodie because she'd borrowed it from Becca's loan pile 2 months ago and never given it back. She had come in tonight because Becca was visiting her boyfriend in Seattle for the week and had asked Vivian to check on the apartment every few days, make sure nothing had gone sideways with the pipes, the usual. She had not planned to take the letters out. She'd been keeping them in a shoebox in her own closet since month 3, when she'd started writing them often enough that she couldn't pretend anymore that each one was a one-time thing. She'd brought the box tonight without entirely deciding to, The way she sometimes made decisions by not actively making them, by just picking up the box and walking next door and sitting down on the floor of his room. She'd told herself she was going to read through them once and then throw them all away. Clean slate, move forward, stop being the woman who wrote secret letters to a man who probably thought of her as nothing more than a good neighbor and a reliable emergency contact. She had been reading them for almost 2 hours when she heard the door. Chot. The silence in the room lasted approximately 4 seconds. To Grayson, it felt longer. He was aware of several things at once: the scatter of papers across every surface, the quality of the lamplight, Vivian's face going completely still in the way it did when she was recalibrating, and the hoodie, his hoodie, hanging off her shoulders in a way that made his chest do something complicated. "Hey," he said, because it was what came out. "Hey," she said back, which was not at all what he'd expected. She was on her feet now, though he hadn't seen her stand. She was holding a piece of paper against her side like she might be able to hide it there, which was an interesting strategy given the 40-odd other letters visible on every surface of the room. "You're," she started. "2 weeks early," he said. "Yeah." "You didn't say." "I didn't tell anyone." He stepped into the room. Not close, just inside it. He set his duffel down beside the door. "Mission got restructured. I booked the flight fast. Didn't want to sit on it." She nodded. She was looking at him like she was doing math. "Becca's in Seattle," she said. "I know. I figured." He looked around the room, slowly, deliberately, so she couldn't pretend he wasn't seeing it. "What is all this?" "It's..." She stopped. She put the paper she was holding down on the nightstand very carefully, like placing something fragile. "It's nothing you should have seen." "You said that already." "Because it's true." "Okay." He crossed his arms. Not defensive. He'd learned a long time ago that crossing your arms was sometimes just giving your hands somewhere to go. "So what is it?" She looked at him for a long moment. He'd been away for 8 months. He'd spent a large part of those 8 months in difficult places doing difficult work, and he'd grown a beard and lost about 6 pounds. He hadn't had to spare and probably looked like something that had been through a laundry cycle too many times. But he'd never been able to make Vivian Ashcroft flinch from a direct question. She didn't flinch now either. She just looked at him with those gray eyes that had always felt to him like they were reading something slightly behind where everyone else was looking. "Letters," she said. "I wrote you letters." "I can see that." "I didn't send them." "I can see that too." He unfolded his arms. "Why?" "Because..." She stopped again. He watched her jaw tighten slightly, the particular expression she got when she was choosing words with more care than usual. "Because sending them would have made it real, and I wasn't..." She exhaled slowly. "I wasn't ready for that to be real." "How many are there?" She met his eyes. 43. He didn't say anything for a moment. 43 letters, he said finally, in 8 months. "I know how that sounds." "How does it sound?" "Like I spent 8 months building a problem I was too scared to solve." She picked up one of the envelopes from the nightstand and then put it back down. "Which is accurate, so..." Grayson walked to the bed, moved a handful of letters aside, and sat down on the edge of the mattress. He was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind that comes after a very long flight preceded by a very long 8 months. But the tiredness had gone somewhere. It was still there. It would come back. But right now his body had apparently decided something else was more important. "Sit down," he said. She looked at the letters on the bed and then at him. "I don't want to crush your..." "Vivian, sit down." She sat. On the opposite corner of the mattress, which was 4 feet away, which he noticed, there were letters between them like a kind of border. "When did you start?" he said. She thought about it. 10 days after you left. I wrote the first one because Ellie had a bad night and I was up with her at 2 in the morning and I wanted to tell you she was okay. And then I kept going." She looked at the letter closest to her and picked it up. "This one is from February. I wrote it after the snowman." She told me about the snowman. Something crossed Vivian's face, soft and quick. "She wore your scarf. I hope that was okay." Of course it was okay. He paused. She said the snowman was wearing a paper army hat. Her idea. She was very specific about it. A small, real smile crossed her mouth. She made me fold it 3 times because the first 2 weren't pointy enough. He looked at the letter in her hands. What does that one say? She glanced down at it. It's not the interesting one. I'd still like to hear it. Grayson, you said you wrote 43 letters and you didn't send a single one, he said. That's 43 things you decided not to tell me. I've been home for approximately 8 minutes. He looked at her steadily. I'm not going anywhere. Read me the letter. Vivian was quiet for a moment. She unfolded the paper in her hands with the care of someone handling something that had been kept for a reason, and she read. February 14th. I know what day it is. I didn't plan for it to be today. I've been trying to write this since Tuesday, and tonight is the night it came out. We built a snowman this afternoon, me and your daughter, in the courtyard behind the building. She wanted it to be wearing an army hat, and I made a paper one out of a piece of the newspaper, and she kept making me redo it until it was correct. She is very exacting. I think she gets that from you. What I keep thinking about, standing there in the cold watching her fix the hat, was how much I wanted to tell you about it. Not in the way I text Becca updates, not logistically. I wanted to tell you the specific things. The way she explained to the snowman that her dad would probably think the hat was funny. The way she said it like she was talking to a person. I don't know what I'm doing, Grayson. I own a company. I have run board meetings in 3 languages. I have never in my adult life done something I couldn't at least partially justify with data. I cannot justify this. Come home safe. V. Vivian folded the letter back up and set it in her lap. Grayson didn't say anything. You wanted to hear it, she said, with a slight edge that he recognized as self-protection. I did. His voice was quiet. I'm glad I did. She looked at her hands. There's 42 more. I know. I'm not going to read all 42 to you tonight. No, he agreed. That would take a while. He shifted slightly on the mattress and one of the letters crinkled under his knee. He picked it up without looking at it. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Why next door? You had a place on the west side. You have a place in every city you spend more than 2 weeks in. I know because Becca told me. Why did you rent 8B? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Because Ellie needed someone consistent, she said finally. And Becca can't always be there. And She stopped, restarted. I was going to be in Portland anyway, and 8B was available. That's the practical answer. Yes. What's the other answer? She looked at him directly. She had always been able to do that. Look at him directly when it mattered, even when her face was giving very little away. I wanted to be close to the things that were his, she said quietly. I know how that sounds. It sounds honest. It sounds unhinged. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He set the letter he'd picked up back down on the mattress. I thought about you. While I was gone. Constantly. She went very still. Not in a complicated way. I just kept thinking about you, you and Ellie, and home. He exhaled. Usually when things got bad, which is the timing that tells you the most about what actually matters. She looked at him for a long moment. How bad did it get? She asked. He considered the question seriously. He always took Vivian's questions seriously. It was one of the things about her. Some of it was standard difficult, he said. Logistical nightmares, supply problems. The heat was brutal for the first 3 months. We lost 2 team members to illness. Not fatalities, but they had to evac, and pulling people mid-mission is hard on everyone. He looked at the wall for a moment. There was one night in April. We'd taken a convoy to a forward camp and the route back got compromised, and we sat in a disabled vehicle for 6 hours while the team figured out extraction. He paused. I thought about Ellie, and then I thought about you. She didn't say anything. Not heroically, he added, just, you were what was there. When I ran out of logistics to worry about and procedures to run through, you were what was left. The specific way you look when you're reading something, that face you make. He glanced at her. You know the face. I don't know what face you mean, she said, which he strongly doubted. Yes, you do, where your eyebrow goes up a little on one side, when something's surprising you but you're still deciding whether to let it. She was quiet for a moment. I do that? All the time. He shifted to look at her more directly. You're doing it right now. She touched her eyebrow briefly, involuntarily, and then caught herself and let her hand drop. He almost smiled. The letters, she started. Yeah. I really didn't mean for you to see them. I know. I was going to read them tonight and throw them all away. She looked around at the scattered papers. I'd been keeping them in a box. I brought them over because I thought being here might make it easier to... She trailed off. I don't know. Let go of it, I suppose. Let go of what? She gave him a look that said she thought he was being deliberately obtuse. The part where I've been half in love with you since last spring, she said. And you were on another continent writing me 0 letters. He absorbed this. I wrote to Ellie, he said. I know, she showed me some of them. Her mouth curved slightly. You drew terrible pictures of the animals you saw. I was a medic, not an artist. The giraffe had 6 legs. Perspective is hard in a field journal. He looked at her. I would have written to you, if I'd known you wanted me to. That's the problem, isn't it? She folded her hands in her lap, looking down at them. You couldn't know because I hadn't said it, and I hadn't said it because I couldn't figure out how to say it without making it a whole thing. You had enough going on. You had Ellie and the deployment, and you were going somewhere that was genuinely dangerous, and the last thing you needed was me. She gestured vaguely, complicating it. You wouldn't have complicated it. You can't know that. I can, actually, he said, because I already told you. You were what I thought about when things got bad. You were already in it. You just didn't know you were. She looked up. There was a silence between them that wasn't exactly uncomfortable. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at 11 o'clock. Distant traffic, a siren somewhere, the sound of rain starting against the window. Rain in October in Portland was not a surprise. It was more like a default state. Your daughter asked about you every day, Vivian said. Not always with words, sometimes just, she'd get quiet in the evenings, or she'd walk past your door and touch it, and keep walking. She paused. I started reading to her at night sometimes, when Becca had a late shift. We went through the whole Narnia series. She says Edmund is her favorite because he makes mistakes and then fixes them. That sounds exactly right, Grayson said. She told me she was saving her best drawings for you. She has a folder. She adds to it every week. He swallowed. She's still up? He asked. Becca texted her goodnight from Seattle at 9. She should be asleep. Vivian glanced at the time. Probably deep under by now. She crashes hard. I know. He stood up from the bed. He needed to see Ellie. That was a physical need. Had been building since the airport, and it was going to keep building until he walked into her room and confirmed with his own eyes that she was real and present and exactly where she was supposed to be. I need to check on her. Of course, Vivian said immediately. She started gathering letters, stacking them in an approximate pile. Leave those, he said. She paused. Grayson, leave them. We're not done. He looked at her. I just need to see my kid. Give me 10 minutes. She sat back slowly, the stack of letters in her hands. 10 minutes, she said. He walked out of the bedroom and down the short hallway to Ellie's room. He turned the handle very slowly and pushed the door open an inch, and the first thing he saw was the nightlight angled exactly the way he'd written in the document, not throwing shadow on the closet door. And then his eyes adjusted and he saw Ellie. 8 years old now. She'd had a birthday while he was gone, and Becca had sent him a video that he'd watched 17 times. She was on her side with one arm flung over the edge of the mattress, her dark hair across the pillow, wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it that he'd never seen before, new things accumulating in his absence the way they always did. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. She looked bigger than the last video call. They always looked bigger in person. He had a complicated feeling about that. Pride and grief mixed together in a way that never seemed to resolve. This acknowledgement that she was growing in both directions, toward herself and away from him. And that was right and good. and also cost something real. He crossed the room quietly and crouched beside the bed. He didn't wake her. He just sat there for a few minutes, close enough to put his hand near hers without touching it, watching her breathe. "Come home safe," the letter had said. He was home. When he came back to his bedroom, Vivian hadn't moved the letters, but she'd straightened them slightly. More organized than scattered now, 43 pale rectangles of paper across the dark surface of his comforter. She was sitting in the middle of them with her knees drawn up and her chin on her knees, and she looked up when he came in. Something in her face asked the question she didn't say out loud. "She's good," he said. "She's good." He sat back down on the bed, closer than before, and the letters between them were fewer. "She's got a new t-shirt. Becca took her to Target 3 weeks ago. She picked it herself." "The dinosaur?" "She said it was realistic." "It wasn't." "I told her that. She said that just meant my information was outdated." Vivian's mouth curved. "She's been saying that to everyone. She learned it from a documentary." He laughed. An actual laugh, short and real, the kind that came from being genuinely caught off guard. The sound surprised him. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed that particular thing until it was happening. A specific laugh, in a specific room, because of a specific person. "I want to read them," he said. She looked at him. "All 43, he said. "Not tonight, but I want to read them, if you'll let me." Vivian was quiet for a moment. She picked up the nearest letter and held it, not opening it. "They're embarrassing," she said. "Probably not as embarrassing as whatever my face was doing when I walked in here and saw you in my hoodie." She looked down at herself. She had apparently not consciously remembered she was wearing it until this moment. "I borrowed it from Becca's loan pile. I don't care. I was going to return it." "Vivian." He waited until she looked at him. "I don't care. Keep it." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her face that he'd never quite seen there before. Not the composed version, not the boardroom version, not even the quieter version he'd gotten over the past year of being neighbors. This was something underneath all of those, something that had maybe been there for a while and hadn't had a way out until tonight. "I didn't want to be the person who waited for you with letters I never sent," she said. "That wasn't the plan." "What was the plan?" "I didn't have one." She set the letter down. That was the problem. He reached out across the space between them and picked up a letter at random from the pile. He didn't open it, he just held it. "Plans are overrated," he said. "I've planned a lot of things. Most of them went sideways. And the ones that didn't?" He thought about it. "The ones that didn't were usually the things I walked into without being ready, showed up and figured it out as I went." She looked at the letter in his hand. "Are you reading that one tonight?" "Depends. Do you want me to?" She took a breath, long and slow, the kind she took before a decision. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." He opened the letter. It was dated early November, just 2 weeks into the deployment. The handwriting was neat but fast, slightly tilted to the right the way her writing always was. He read it once quickly and then went back to the beginning and read it again. When he was done, he set it down carefully, face up between them on the mattress. Neither of them said anything for a while. Outside, the rain had settled into the steady kind. Not dramatic, just persistent. And the lamp cast its yellow circle over the bed and the letters, and the two of them sitting in the middle of it, not quite touching, both very still. "You wrote that," he said finally. 2 weeks in." "Yes." "So you felt this 2 weeks in." "I felt it before you left," she said. 2 weeks in was just when I stopped pretending I didn't." He looked at her profile, the line of her jaw, the way she was looking at the letter rather than at him, her hands quiet in her lap. "I'm going to need a few days," he said. She glanced at him. "To sleep and to actually see Ellie when she's awake, and to decompress, I guess. Re-enter. 8 months is a long time, and I'm not all the way back yet." He paused. "But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere, and we're going to talk about this." He gestured slightly at the letters, at the room, at the general situation. "All of it." She nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay." He stood. He carried one of the letters with him, the November one, and set it on the nightstand beside the lamp. He didn't explain why. It seemed obvious. You should go home. Get some sleep. She stood and began gathering the letters into the box she'd brought them in. He watched her hands work, quick and efficient, the same way she did everything. Grayson, she said without looking up. Yeah, for what it's worth. She paused over the box. I'm glad you came back early. Yeah, he said. Me too. She picked up the box and walked to the door. She stopped there for a moment with her back to him, and he watched her shoulders settle, that particular adjustment she made when she was putting something back into place. Then she walked out. He heard her key in the door of 8B. He heard it close. He turned off the lamp and sat for a moment in the dark room, his duffel still on the floor by the door, 42 letters in a box next door, and the one letter from November sitting on the nightstand beside him like a kind of evidence. He thought, 8 months away, and she was here the whole time. He thought about the snowman with the paper army hat. He lay back on the bed without changing his clothes, and he looked at the ceiling, and the city moved outside in the rain, and somewhere in the apartment down the hall, his daughter was dreaming. And he was finally, actually, home. His phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number. One message. He picked it up and read it, and the tiredness came back all at once. Different now, with something cold running underneath it. She kept more than letters. Check the box under your bed. The message sat on his screen for a long time. Grayson read it again. She kept more than letters. Check the box under your bed. Unknown number. Not blocked, just a number he didn't recognize, a 503 area code, Portland local. He stared at it long enough that the screen dimmed and locked itself. He sat up and turned on the lamp. The bed frame had a storage drawer built into the base. He'd put it to use before deployment, mostly extra blankets and a box of Ellie's art supplies she'd outgrown. He reached down and pulled it open. The blankets were still there. The art supply box was still there. And behind both of them, pushed to the back corner, was something that hadn't been there when he left. A shoebox. Not the same one Vivian had taken next door. This one was smaller. A white box with no label. He pulled it out and set it on his knees and opened it slowly, like he wasn't sure what he was dealing with. Inside was a stack of photographs, a handwritten list of dates, 2 plane tickets clipped together with a binder clip, a dried flower, he didn't know what kind, wrapped in a strip of wax paper, and at the bottom, a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a hand-drawn map of a neighborhood in Ashland, Oregon, with a small red X marked on one street corner. He sat with the box on his knees for a full minute, not moving. Then he put the lid back on and set it on the nightstand next to the November letter, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling. He did not sleep much that night, I'll say. Ellie found him at 6:15 in the morning, already awake, sitting in the kitchen with bad coffee and worse posture, and the noise she made, somewhere between a scream and a word, woke up the entire floor. He caught her mid-launch, both arms, her legs wrapping around his waist, the way they had since she was 4 years old, and apparently still would at 8, and he buried his face in her hair and just held on. "You're home," she said into his shoulder. "You're actually home." "I'm actually home." "You're early." "I am." She pulled back to look at him with the critical assessment of a child who had been waiting a long time and wanted to make sure the real thing matched the version she'd been carrying around in her head. Her eyes went to his beard. "That's new," she said. "Does it look bad?" She considered it seriously. "It looks like you got tired." "That's accurate." He set her down on the counter. She was in her pajamas, the dinosaur shirt from last night, her hair in the 2 flat braids Becca must have done yesterday and slept in since. "I heard you've been collecting drawings for me." Her face shifted. Surprised that he knew, then pleased, then deliberately casual in the way she had about things she cared deeply about. "There's a folder," she said. "It's in my room. I'll get it later." "I'd like that." He pushed her hair back from her face. "I heard about the snowman." "Vivian helped, but the hat was my idea." "I know, she told me." Ellie's eyes went to the hallway and then back to him, and in that small movement was everything she wasn't saying. The months of evenings, the read-aloud sessions, the way she'd learned to knock on 8B's door when the nights got too long. She had a child's instinct for the shape of a thing even when she couldn't name it. "Is she coming for breakfast?" Ellie asked. I don't know. Maybe. She makes better eggs than you. She really does, he agreed. Vivian knocked at 7:45. She was in work clothes, a charcoal blazer, dark trousers, her hair up, which meant she was heading to the office and had stopped because she'd heard Ellie's 6:15 announcement through the shared wall and because not stopping would have required an act of will she apparently hadn't had. Grayson let her in. She registered his face first, the fact that he hadn't slept, and then registered Ellie already eating cereal at the table, and her expression did the quick adjustment it always did when she walked into a room containing both of them, like she was shifting into a different register. She screamed, Vivian said. Pretty loud, he agreed. I heard it through the wall. Good morning to you too. She almost smiled. Almost. She stepped inside and Ellie said, Vivian, with her mouth full of cereal, and pointed at Grayson with her spoon as if she needed confirmation that this was real. And Vivian said, I know, I see him, and sat down across from Ellie at the kitchen table with the ease of someone who had sat at that table many times. Grayson poured her coffee without asking how she took it. He'd learned that a year ago, the first time she'd come over for a building meeting, and he'd handed her a mug and set it in front of her, and she took it without looking up from Ellie. I need to talk to you, he said quietly, leaning against the counter. She glanced at him over Ellie's head. Later, he said. When you get back. I have a 6 o'clock board call. Before the board call, then. She read his face. She was good at that, better than most people, which said something given how little he typically gave away. Whatever she saw there made her set down the coffee. What happened? She said. He shook his head slightly toward Ellie. Vivian nodded once. Later. They both knew the word without saying it. She came back at 4:30. Ellie was at a friend's place until 6. A Thursday playdate that Becca had apparently scheduled weeks ago, and that Grayson had been informed of via text from Becca, who was still in Seattle, but had sent about 15 messages since 6 a.m. ranging from, oh my God, you're home, to did you eat to call me when the kid's not around. We need to talk about the Vivian situation. He had not yet responded to the last one. He'd spent the day doing the basic work of re-entering, a long shower, food that wasn't airport food, 3 hours of sleep in the afternoon that left him feeling worse rather than better in the specific way that recovery sleep sometimes did. He'd unpacked. He'd looked at the folder of drawings Ellie had placed on the kitchen table before Becca's friend picked her up. 40 weeks, 40 drawings, the folder fat and organized, each one dated on the back in Ellie's careful handwriting. He'd sat with the folder for almost an hour. When Vivian knocked, he opened the door and she stepped in, still in her blazer, which meant the board meeting was still an hour out, and she looked at him and said, Tell me. He handed her the shoebox. She took it the way people take things they're not sure about. She carried it to the couch and sat and opened it, and the sequence of her face across the next 30 seconds was something he watched carefully. The photographs, the list, the tickets, the flower and wax paper, the map. She closed the box. She opened it again and took out the 2 plane tickets and held them. Portland to Ashland, Oregon. 2 seats. Weekend of November 8th, a month away. I bought those in August, she said. He waited. There was a place Ellie mentioned wanting to see. The Shakespeare Theater. She'd seen a book about it at school. She kept looking at the tickets. I thought, when you got back after you'd settled in, it could be a thing. The 3 of us. She paused. I didn't tell anyone about them. I put them in the box because I didn't want them sitting somewhere I'd see them every day. Who else knew the box was there? She looked up. What? He took out his phone and showed her the message. She kept more than letters. Check the box under your bed. She stared at the screen. Her expression went through several things at once. Confusion, then something harder underneath it. Unknown number, she said. 503 area code. She set the tickets down on the cushion beside her. I didn't tell anyone about that box. I put it there myself 2 months ago. Becca was out for the afternoon and I used my key and... She stopped. Becca didn't know about the box. I was careful. Someone knew. Someone knew, she agreed, which means someone was either in your apartment when I put it there or... She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. Or, he said. She didn't answer immediately. She picked up the dried flower and looked at it, and something crossed her face that was almost recognition. "This is a dried sprig of lavender," she said, "from a specific shop in Ashland. I was there in June for a company site visit." She looked at him. "I sent a photo of it to my sister." Grayson sat down in the chair across from her. "You have one sister?" "Margot. She's 35. She lives in Eugene." Vivian was still looking at the lavender. "She came to visit in September. She stayed in 8B for a few nights while I was in Seattle for a conference." She paused. "I gave her my key." "Did she know about the letters?" "No, I never told—" She stopped. "I kept the shoebox in my closet. If she looked—" She set the lavender down. Margot has never in her life left something alone that she thought was her business. Is this her business? Vivian exhaled slowly. She thinks everything involving me is her business. She's been that way since we were kids. A pause. She's also been telling me for 3 years that I needed to stop being such a... She glanced toward the kitchen, old habit, checking for Ellie. "Such a coward about things that matter." "She knew how you felt about me?" "She suspected. She's perceptive and annoying in equal measure." Vivian stood up and walked to the window. The afternoon light was flat and gray, the kind that made Portland look like a pencil sketch of itself. She would have read the letters. If she found the shoebox, she would have read them. "I know her." She crossed her arms. "She sent one, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. "I don't know," Grayson said. "Did you get any mail while you were in deployment?" "My assistant forwards anything physical to the Portland office." He pulled up his email on his phone, went to the deployment folder, scanned. "I got one letter with no return address in March. I thought it was from one of the community organizations we worked with. It wasn't unusual to get unsolicited mail. I read about the first paragraph and set it aside because I couldn't figure out who it was from." He stopped. "Did you keep it?" "It's in my duffel, somewhere." He set his phone down. "I didn't finish reading it because I couldn't figure out the context." She was looking at him. "What did the first paragraph say?" He thought back. March, 4 months in, the worst stretch of the deployment, the period that had come back to him in the van during extraction, the 6 hours in the dark. He'd opened the letter after a long day, and the handwriting had been unfamiliar, and the opening lines had made no sense without context, and he'd filed it away mentally as correspondence that needed more bandwidth than he had. Something like, he tried to recall it. "You don't know me, but I know about you. I know about the letters. I think you should read them." He paused. "I thought it was some kind of... You thought it was strange and filed it away." "I was in the middle of a deployment." She turned back to the window. The tension in her shoulders was a specific shape he'd learned. Not anger exactly, more like the feeling of a thing you'd been carefully managing for a long time suddenly being outside your control. "My sister mailed you one of my letters," she said, "months ago. And you didn't read it." "I didn't know whose it was." "So for 8 months, you had a letter from me in your bag that you never read." He considered his next words carefully. "If I'd read it, Vivian, I would have written back immediately. I would have called. I would have—" "I know," she said quietly. "I know that. I'm not—" She turned around. "I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at the situation. I'm angry that this is how... that the first time you're hearing that I love you is because you found a box of secret things in your own bedroom and got an anonymous text from someone who is absolutely my sister." The word love went into the air between them and stayed there. She looked like she hadn't intended to say it quite that directly. He looked like he'd been waiting for it without knowing he was. "I love you," she said again, quieter this time, like she was testing whether it still held outside of letters. "I wrote it in probably a third of those letters, and I never said it out loud because you were scared." "Because I was scared," she agreed, "which is not something I do. I run a $4 billion company. I have never been scared of a meeting or a negotiation or a difficult decision in my professional life." She paused. "And then I met you, and you have terrible taste in kitchen equipment, and you draw 6-legged giraffes, and your kid quotes documentaries at me, and I couldn't figure out how to just say it." He was quiet for a moment. "Say it again," he said. She looked at him. I need to hear it one more time, he said. Not in a letter, just say it. Grayson. Vivian, she exhaled. I love you. There was a slight roughness in her voice that she didn't iron out this time, and that roughness was maybe the most honest thing he'd heard in 8 months. I have loved you for a while and I handled it badly, and I wrote 43 letters about it, and your sister gave a key to my sister who apparently read my mail and mailed one to another continent, and here we are. He stood up. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close enough that he could see the small detail of her, the day's tiredness around her eyes, a faint mascara shadow she hadn't touched up, the slight unevenness of her breathing that she was working to control. She was looking up at him with the expression he'd described the night before, the eyebrow, the not yet decided thing. Except this time the deciding was happening in real time. I don't have a letter, he said. I never wrote one. I don't know what I would have put in it. He reached up and touched her face, just his thumb against her cheek, brief and deliberate. But I know what I thought about in that van in April, in the dark, 6 hours in. And I know what I thought when I walked into that room last night and saw you in my hoodie, reading something you'd written to me. What did you think? She said. That I'd been an idiot, he said, for not saying anything before I left. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. We were both idiots, she said. Yeah. He dropped his hand. He stepped back. Not far, just enough to think. But before we figure out what comes next, I need to deal with the fact that someone is sending me anonymous texts about things that were supposed to be private. Because that part needs to stop, she agreed. Immediately. I need to know who it is for certain. The texts, the box, whether Margot actually sent that letter. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Another unknown number. Same 503 area code as his. She turned the screen to show him. The message was short. I know you're together right now. I know you're talking about me. Check the coat closet in 8A. They both looked at the coat closet. The coat closet was across the room. Grayson moved first. He opened it. On the top shelf, above the row of hanging coats and Ellie's rain boots, and the 3-year accumulation of things that get put in coat closets because there's nowhere better for them, there was a small envelope, sealed, with his name on it in handwriting he didn't recognize. He took it down. He held it for a moment. That was not there before I left, he said. No, she agreed. He opened it. Inside was a single index card, handwritten, and the message on it was 6 words. She deserves better than your silence. He turned the card over. Nothing on the back. Vivian had stepped close enough to read it over his shoulder. She went very still. She said. Your sister thinks I've been silent, he said. You were on another continent. That's what I'd have said. He looked at the card. She's been in this apartment. Recently. This wasn't here in August when I packed up. Margot came in September. She had my key. Vivian took the card from him and looked at it with the expression of someone who had just found confirmation of something they'd half hoped was wrong. She would have. She absolutely would have done this. Her voice had gone quiet and controlled in a way that he recognized as the version she used when she was actually very angry. She read the letters. She came in here and left. Breadcrumbs. She set the card down on the side table. She's been running an operation. A what? My sister, Vivian said, went to business school and has applied that knowledge exclusively to the personal lives of people she loves. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple briefly. She has been telling me for 3 years that I need to say something to you. She's told me in direct terms. She's told me in metaphors. She once spent 45 minutes explaining to me using a supply chain analogy why I was creating unnecessary friction. Despite everything, he almost laughed. A supply chain analogy. She meant well. She's been leaving me messages and planting things in my apartment. She absolutely has. Vivian picked up her phone. I need to call her. Before you do, he put his hand over hers, not restraining, just contact. She looked at him. Before you call her. For the record. She waited. I'm not silent, he said. I have things to say. I've had things to say for a while, and I chose the wrong time to be careful about it. He held her eyes. Whatever your sister thinks she needed to do to push this, she's not wrong about the direction, just the method. Vivian looked at him for a moment. The afternoon light had shifted and was coming in lower now, catching the edge of her face. I know, she said. I know. Okay. He let go of her hand. Call your sister. She called. It rang 4 times before picking up, which meant Margot had seen who was calling and was deciding whether to answer, which meant she knew exactly why Vivian was calling, which meant Vivian was correct about all of it. Hey, said a voice on the other end with the very specific tone of someone trying to project casualness over a significant amount of awareness. Margot, Vivian said, where are you right now? A pause. Eugene. And where were you in September? Another pause. Longer. Portland, Margot said. In my neighbor's apartment. A very long pause. I was checking on things. You were reading my letters. Nothing. And you mailed one, Vivian said, to Nairobi. To be fair, Margot said carefully, I mailed it to the deployment coordination address. I didn't know the exact... Margot. You weren't going to say anything, Margot said, and the careful voice dropped, replaced with something more direct. You'd been writing those letters for months, and you were going to throw them all away. I read them, Viv. All of them. And then I read the one you wrote in March. That was private. That was a love letter you weren't going to send. That was my choice. Was it, though? Was it your choice? Or was it the fear making the choice for you? Vivian was gripping her phone with more pressure than the conversation technically required. Grayson was leaning against the wall across the room, watching her without pretending he wasn't. You could have come to me, Vivian said. You could have told me what you were thinking. I did, Margot said. For 3 years. You said you had it handled. I did have it handled. You had 43 unsent letters in a shoebox in your closet. A silence. He came home early, Vivian said finally. A pause. What? He came home 2 weeks early, last night. He found the letters. Vivian looked at Grayson. He found your box in his coat closet. A very long silence on the other end. Then quietly, Oh. Oh, Vivian agreed. Is he right there? He is standing about 6 feet away. Is he... A pause. Is he angry? Grayson held out his hand. Vivian looked at him for a moment and then, slowly, held the phone out toward him. He took it. Hi, Margot, he said. Silence on the other end. Then, Hi, Grayson. Very small voice. I'm not angry, he said. I need you to stop sending anonymous messages to our phones, and I need you to not enter the apartment again without Vivian or me present. He paused. And I need you to know that whatever you were trying to do, it worked, even though the method was terrible. Another long pause. Vivian is going to be so mad at me, Margot said. Vivian is already mad at you, he said, but she'll get over it. He glanced at Vivian, who was looking at him with an expression that was very carefully not being several things at once. She's also, for the record, not as hard to read as she thinks she is. He heard something on the other end that might have been a laugh or might have been a suppressed sob. Hard to tell with phones. He handed the phone back to Vivian and stepped away, giving her the room, which she needed. He went to the kitchen and put water on for more coffee because it was that kind of afternoon. From the living room he could hear Vivian's voice, low and measured, in the register she used with family, which was different from the boardroom register and different from the voice she used with Ellie, and different from the voice she'd been using with him today. And he filed all of it away the way he'd been filing things about her away for a year, in the place where he kept things that mattered. The water boiled. He heard her say, I know, Margot twice, and then, yes, he's fine, Margot. And then a long pause, and then something quieter he couldn't make out. Then she came into the kitchen. He set a mug in front of her. She sat down at the table. She cried, Vivian said. Yeah, she does that. It's manipulative, except that it's also genuine, which makes it impossible to deal with. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She's been worried about me. People who love you tend to do that, he said. She looked at him. I know, she said. Her phone buzzed again on the table. They both looked at it. Unknown number. Same 503 area code. There's one more thing. It's in the box. Look at the photographs. They stared at the message. Vivian picked up her phone slowly. Margot, I'm looking at your text right now. From somewhere across the city, Margot said, Look at the photographs in the box. You're still sending these, even now? Just that one more, Margot said. Just that one. Vivian set the phone down and looked at Grayson. He was already walking toward the shoebox on the couch. He opened it and took out the photographs. There were 6 of them. 5 were what he'd seen the night before. Some he recognized as things Becca had taken. Ellie at the building courtyard. Ellie in a pumpkin patch. One of Ellie and Vivian at what looked like a library. The 6th one he hadn't looked at closely. He looked at it now. It was a photo of him, taken at the airport, the day he'd deployed, 8 months and 11 days ago. He was in the departures area, duffel over one shoulder, and he was looking back. He hadn't remembered looking back, but there he was, turned over his left shoulder at something or someone behind him, and his expression was not the face of a man who had finished saying goodbye. He turned it over. On the back, in Vivian's handwriting. He looked back. He held the photograph for a long time. He remembered that moment now, so turning at the last possible second because he'd forgotten to say something, except that wasn't quite it. Except that he hadn't forgotten anything specific. Except that the real reason was that he hadn't been ready to stop looking yet. He hadn't known she was watching. He hadn't known she'd had a camera. He hadn't known she'd kept the picture. He set it down on the couch carefully, face up. He looked at Vivian, who was watching him from the kitchen doorway with both hands around her mug and her face very still in the way that meant she was holding something carefully in place. You were there, he said, at the airport. I drove Becca, she said. And Ellie. I didn't see you. I stayed back, she said. I wasn't, she paused. I didn't think it was my place, to be at the front for the goodbye. He looked at the photograph. He looked back. It was your place, he said. She didn't say anything for a moment. I know that now, she said. Outside, the October evening had settled in full, and the city was doing its quiet city things, and somewhere across Portland, Margot was putting her phone down, having done what she'd come to do. And in the kitchen of apartment 8A, the coffee was getting cold in both their mugs. Grayson picked up the photograph. He walked to the kitchen and set it on the table between them, face up, and he sat down, and Vivian looked at it the way people look at evidence of something they already knew but had never seen confirmed in that particular way. 43 letters, he said. 43 letters, she agreed, and 1 photograph. And 1 photograph. He looked at her across the table. We're going to figure this out, he said. Not a question, not a performance, just the steady, certain way he said things when he meant them all the way down. She held his eyes. Yeah, she said. We are. The photograph stayed on the kitchen table for the rest of the evening. Neither of them moved it. It became a kind of fixed point, Grayson and Vivian both moving around it, refilling coffee, talking, going quiet, talking again, and every so often one of them would glance at it the way you glance at something that is reorganized the way you understand a period of time you thought you already knew. Him at the airport turned back. Her behind a camera she hadn't mentioned for 8 months. Ellie came home at 6 with paint on her left elbow and a story about a papier-mâché volcano that had gone structurally wrong, and she moved into the apartment the way she always did, filling it, making it louder, making it more itself. She ate dinner between them at the kitchen table and talked about the volcano, and about her friend Danny's dog, and about a chapter book she was almost finished with, and she kept glancing at Grayson the way she'd been glancing at him all day, quick checks, making sure he was still there. Are you staying? She asked him, after Vivian had cleared the plates. Staying where? He said. Here, home. She said it simply. You're not going back. No, I'm not going back. He looked at her. I'm staying. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. Then she nodded once and went back to her chapter book with the settled air of a person who had gotten the information they needed. Vivian left at 8:30 for her board call, and Grayson put Ellie to bed and read to her until she was more asleep than awake. And then he sat in the living room in the dark for a while with the photograph on the table in front of him and the shoebox open beside it. He went through the contents slowly this time. The dried lavender, the handwritten list of dates which turned out to be a record of things Ellie had done across the 8 months. Every small milestone written in Vivian's clean handwriting. The plane tickets to Ashland. He looked at the tickets for a long time. 2 seats. She'd bought 2 seats for a trip she'd written in multiple letters and still not found the courage to suggest out loud. Portland to Ashland. A Shakespeare theater. Ellie's book. A red X on a hand-drawn map. She had planned a whole day with the kind of precision she brought to things at work, for a relationship that existed entirely in her own head at the time of planning. He did not find that pathetic or strange. He found it, in a way he couldn't quite articulate, the most honest thing about her. He put everything back in the box and went to sleep. Friday morning arrived with the particular gray gentleness of a Pacific Northwest October, and Grayson stood at the kitchen window with his first coffee watching rain move across the building rooftops and felt, for the first time since landing, something close to settled. Not fixed, he was still running on limited sleep, and his equilibrium was still doing the slow work of recalibrating from months away. But the quality of his own quietness had changed. The anxious edge was out of it. He heard the door of 8B open and close at 7:40. Vivian's footsteps in the hallway. He'd learned those in the past year, the specific rhythm of her, heels on hardwood, the slight pause before the elevator, and then, instead of the elevator, there was a knock at his door. She was in running clothes, hair down, no makeup. It was a version of her he'd seen maybe 3 times, always on weekend mornings when they'd ended up in the hallway at the same time, and it always required a small recalibration because it was so different from the version the rest of the world got. Board call ran late, she said, by way of explanation for why she was going running at 7:40 in the morning. I never slept. Come in, he said. I can't. I'm going to be disgusting in about 40 minutes and I'll want a shower. Vivian, come in. She came in. He poured her coffee. She sat on the counter instead of the table, which was something he'd noticed she did when she was tired. She stopped being precise about where she sat. How was the call? He said. Long. There's a bid situation in Cincinnati that's become complicated. She wrapped both hands around the mug. It's fine. I can handle it. A pause. I handled it, actually. It's resolved. I'm just tired. Did you sleep at all? A little. After the call. Maybe 2 hours. She looked at him over the rim of the mug. You look better than yesterday. Low bar. Still counts. She looked at the shoebox on the counter, which he hadn't put away. She looked at it with the expression of someone who has made a decision and is checking whether it still holds in the morning light. It apparently did, because she looked back at him and said, I've been thinking about what you said last night, that we're going to figure it out. Yeah. I want to be clear about something. She set the mug down. I don't need this to be perfect from the start. I'm not expecting perfect. I know what you came back from, and I know what you still have to decompress from, and I'm not putting a timeline on anything. She paused. But I need it to be real, not careful, not managed. Managed, he repeated. I manage things for a living. I'm very good at it, and I have a tendency to, she searched for the word, contain things, control the variables. Decide in advance how much I'm going to allow something to matter. She looked at him directly. I don't want to do that with you. I've been doing it for a year, and it didn't work, and I ended up with 43 unsent letters, so... She spread her hands slightly. I'm done managing this. Grayson looked at her for a moment. Good, he said. She blinked. Good? Good. Because I've been watching you contain things since I met you, and it's exhausting to watch. I can only imagine what it's like to do. Something loosened in her face. It is exhausting. Yeah. He leaned against the counter across from her. For what it's worth, I don't need perfect either. I've got a kid who quotes documentaries and a medical kit under the bathroom sink and a coffee maker that's been broken for 4 months, and I just got home from 8 months in East Africa. I'm not in a position to offer perfect. He held her eyes. But I'm here, and I want to be here, and we can start with that. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning moved outside the window, rain and gray and a pigeon on the ledge doing something with a piece of bread, and the apartment was quiet with Ellie still asleep and the whole day still ahead. Okay, she said. Okay. She picked up her mug again. I'm calling Margot today. You called her last night. I called her last night to be angry at her. I'm calling her today to actually talk. She drank the rest of the coffee. She mailed you a letter. She left things in your apartment. She was running an operation, as you put it, a slight curve to her mouth. And she was right about all of it, which is the most infuriating possible outcome. She loves you, he said. She's terrible. She loves you, he repeated. Both things are true. She slid off the counter and set the mug in the sink. I'm going to run. When I get back, I want to do something normal. Something that doesn't involve letters or boxes or anonymous texts from my sister. Ellie's going to want to show you something when she wakes up, he said. She has a library book she wants your opinion on. Vivian paused at the door. The small shift in her face, the one she got when Ellie came into the conversation, was not something she ever seemed to notice herself doing. It was completely unguarded, every time. What's the book about? She said. She said it's about a girl who goes to a school for explorers, he said. She's been saving the last 2 chapters. Saving them for when? For when she had someone to read the ending with. He paused. She told me that the other night, apparently. Becca mentioned it. Vivian stood in the doorway for a moment longer than she needed to. I'll be back in 40 minutes, she said. With that. The weekend that followed was not dramatic. In the accounting of Grayson's life, it would not have stood out as an event the way deployments or emergencies or the night he'd walked into his bedroom and found 43 unsent letters stood out. It was small and ordinary and patched together from the kind of moments that don't photograph well. Ellie read the last 2 chapters of her book aloud to both of them, very seriously, in the living room Saturday morning. Vivian sat on the floor with her back against the couch and her coffee going cold because she kept forgetting to drink it, listening to an 8-year-old read about a girl named Cass who was learning to find her direction without a compass. And when Ellie finished the last page, she looked at Vivian and said, "Is that a good ending?" And Vivian said, "Yes, I think that's a very good ending." Grayson watched this from the kitchen doorway and said nothing and filed it away. Saturday afternoon, Becca came back from Seattle. She stood in the hallway for approximately 45 seconds before launching herself at Grayson with a force that reminded him she'd been a competitive gymnast until age 15. And then she pulled back and looked at his face and said, "You look terrible." And "I'm so glad you're home," in the same breath. She had opinions about the beard, which she delivered while Ellie ate cereal, and Vivian sat at the table pretending to look at her phone, but clearly listening to all of it. "You knew?" Grayson said to Becca, about Vivian's letters, about the situation. Becca had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I knew something," she said. "I didn't know about the letters specifically." A pause. "I knew she was here more than she needed to be for a woman who'd supposedly just needed a temporary place close to the office. Did you know her lease got extended?" "I may have been aware of that, yes." Becca. "What was I supposed to do? Tell her to move out? She's good with Ellie. Becca looked at Vivian, who was examining her phone with great attention. "She was good for everyone while you were gone." She looked back at Grayson. "Some things you let happen." He held Becca's eyes for a moment. She didn't look away. They had known each other long enough. She was 30, 5 years younger, had been in his corner since he was 13 and she was 8, and had decided that was her position in the world, that he could read the full argument in her expression without her making it out loud. He let it go. She was right, and they both knew it. Saturday evening, Vivian called Margot. This time Grayson wasn't in the room for the call. Ellie had recruited him into a board game that required 2 players and the full use of the kitchen table, and he could hear Vivian's voice from the living room as the call went on, the tone of it changing as it progressed, starting controlled and ending somewhere softer. When she came back to the table, she sat down and picked up a game piece and said, She's coming to Portland next weekend, without looking up. Good, Grayson said. Ellie looked between them. Is Margot the one who sent the mysterious messages? They both looked at Ellie. I heard some things, Ellie said with dignity. She's a person I want you to meet, Vivian told her. She meddles, but she means well. Ellie considered this. Like in books when someone does the wrong thing for the right reason? Yes, Vivian said. Exactly like that. Ellie moved her game piece. Edmund does that, she said. In Narnia. She glanced at Vivian. We read that one together, she told Grayson, when you were gone. I know, he said. She told me you liked Edmund. Ellie nodded seriously. People who make mistakes and fix them are more interesting, she said, than people who just get everything right. A short silence. Where did you hear that? Grayson said. Ellie shrugged. I thought of it. He looked at Vivian. She was looking at Ellie with an expression that was three things at once, and none of them were boardroom. Sunday afternoon, Grayson found the shoebox on the kitchen table with the plane tickets on top of it and a post-it note that said, in Vivian's handwriting, the tickets are refundable, but they don't have to be. V. He read the note twice. He peeled it off the ticket and stuck it to the back of the November letter, which he had in fact kept on his nightstand, and he sent Vivian a text that said, keep the tickets. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, you sure? He typed, Ellie's going to have opinions about the seating. A pause. Then, she already does. I may have mentioned Ashland. He could imagine exactly the conversation. Vivian's deliberate casualness, Ellie's immediate and total interest, the series of questions that would follow. He set the phone down and looked at the shoebox for a moment, at the dried lavender and the photographs and the hand-drawn map with the small red X. He picked up the map and looked at the X. A corner in Ashland, Oregon. A street he didn't know. He looked it up on his phone. The corner turned out to be a small independent bookshop and a coffee place side by side, the kind that shared a wall and had a connecting door, the kind of place that you could pass without noticing or wander into and spend 3 hours in without intending to. He looked at it for a long time. She'd picked a place. Not a landmark, not a famous theater, not a restaurant with a reservation and a dress code, a bookshop, a coffee place, a corner where a person could wander and spend time without performing anything. He put the map back in the box and closed the lid. Monday. Becca took Ellie to school, and Vivian went to the office, and Grayson had the apartment to himself for the first time since he'd come home. He'd been expecting to want the quiet, weeks in the field with no privacy built up a particular hunger for it, but what he actually found when the door closed and the hallway went silent was that the apartment felt too large, in a way it hadn't before he left. He sat with that for a while. He was honest enough with himself to know what it meant and what it didn't mean. He was not, he told himself carefully, someone who jumped from 8 months of deployment directly into a life-altering decision. He had a daughter to settle. He had his own equilibrium to rebuild. He had a job to return to. He'd emailed his nonprofit director the morning after he'd come home and been met with a response that was equal parts relieved and bureaucratic, the usual. But he also sat at the kitchen table with the post-it from Vivian stuck to the cover of his field journal. And he thought about a corner in Ashland with a bookshop and a coffee place. And he thought about a photograph of himself at an airport, looking back at something the camera caught and he hadn't known to name. He was still there an hour later when his phone buzzed. Vivienne. Not a text this time, a call. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, are you home? She said. There was something in her voice, tighter than usual, controlled, but working at it. Yeah, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. A pause. There's something I need to tell you. It's related to the letters, the situation. I found out this morning and I needed to think about it before I told you. He sat up. Okay, tell me. The letter Margot sent you, she said, in March. The one you didn't finish reading. Yeah. I asked her which one she sent, which letter. Another pause. It was the March one. The one I wrote the week after. She stopped. It was the most direct one. Of all 43, it was the least managed. She exhaled. It said everything I'd been working around in the others. It said it clearly. He was quiet. If you'd read it, she said, in March, 4 months into the deployment. Her voice was level. What would you have done? He thought about March, the compound in the second region, the slow period after the convoy situation, the particular suspended quality of those weeks when the work had lightened slightly and the time had weight. He thought about sitting in his bunk reading a letter that said everything clearly. I would have called you, he said. That's what I thought, she said. Vivian, I'm not upset, she said quickly. I know it wasn't your fault, you didn't read it, you had no context. I know all of that. She paused. I just needed to say it out loud to someone. That there were 4 months where we could have been, where I could have stopped writing and started actually talking to you. Another pause. 4 months of letters I didn't have to write. But you did write them, he said, because you didn't know I had it. Because I didn't know. She was quiet for a moment. There's a version of this where I just told you before you left, and you knew, and the whole deployment was different, and you came home to something that was already real instead of a pile of paper. He thought about that version, the logistics of it, the airport, the conversation they didn't have, the 8 months of calls and video chats that had talked around everything instead of through it. You weren't ready, he said. No. And I wasn't pushing, which is its own thing. He leaned back in his chair. I knew something before I left. Not clearly, but I knew there was something I wasn't saying, and I chose not to say it because the timing was bad. And I was leaving, and it seemed like a better idea to wait. He paused. So we both did that. She was quiet for a moment. We were both idiots, she said, which was what she'd said Thursday night. The same words, except this time it didn't have the same lightness. Yeah, he said. We were. He looked at the post-it on his journal. They don't have to be. But we're not being idiots now. No, she said. We're not. A pause. The sound of her office. Muted traffic through glass. The faint presence of a building doing its business around her. I have a thing tonight, she said. A dinner I can't cancel. But tomorrow. Tomorrow Ellie gets home at 3:30, he said. You could come for dinner. A pause that was shorter than he expected. What are you making? Whatever Ellie requests, which means there's a 60% chance it's pasta. I like pasta. I know you do. Another short pause. He could hear her breathing, slow and careful, doing the work of settling something back into place. He'd learned that sound over the past year in the small ways you learn someone through a shared wall and a habit of drinking coffee at the same time in the morning. Grayson, she said. Yeah. Thank you for... She stopped. For not making this into something complicated. It's already complicated, he said. I just didn't see the point in making it harder than it needed to be. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. That's very reasonable of you. I have my moments. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. He sat with the phone in his hand after she hung up, and the apartment was quiet around him, and the October light moved through the window in the slow way it did at this latitude in this season. Not bright, but present, the kind of light that asked nothing and gave what it could. He opened his field journal, found a blank page near the back. He sat for a moment, and then he picked up a pen. He wrote the date at the top. He thought about what he wanted to say. He had never been a person who wrote things down for their own sake. He kept field journals because the work required documentation, not because he needed an outlet. But he sat there for a few minutes and thought about a woman at an airport with a camera and a dried sprig of lavender from a town she'd been to alone, and tickets for a trip she'd planned for 2 people. And then he wrote, I looked back. I just didn't know you were watching. He looked at it for a moment. He didn't write more. It was enough. Tuesday dinner was pasta because Ellie had requested it, specifically the kind with the butter and the parmesan and the small amount of garlic that was a reasonable quantity and not the enormous amount Grayson defaulted to when left unsupervised. Vivienne arrived at 5:50 with a bottle of sparkling water and a small paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks away, and Ellie said, "Did you get the almond ones?" before Vivian had her shoes off. "I got the almond ones," Vivian said. "Those are the good ones," Ellie said, and went back to setting the table with the satisfied air of someone whose standards have been met. Dinner was ordinary and loud in the way dinners with Ellie were loud. She had 4 topics she wanted to cover, and she covered all of them. A new development with the papier-mâché volcano, a conflict with Danny over whose turn it was to feed the classroom fish, a question about whether Oregon had ever had a king, and an extended query about what Ashland was like based on something Vivian had told her that Vivian didn't remember saying. "You said there was a theater," Ellie said. "There is a theater," Vivian confirmed. "A Shakespeare theater." "Yes." Ellie looked at Grayson. "We read A Midsummer Night's Dream," she told him. Vivian explained all the confusing parts. "All of them?" he said. "Most of them. Some parts she said were just confusing on purpose." "That's accurate," Vivian said. "Can we go?" Ellie said, not performing the ask, not building to it, just asking, the direct way she did things. "To Ashland." Grayson and Vivian looked at each other across the table. Something passed between them, brief, quiet, a shared acknowledgement of a thing that had been planned in secret and was now, without ceremony, becoming a plan that was simply theirs. "Yeah," Grayson said, "we can go." Ellie received this with the contained satisfaction of someone who had done the math and arrived at the right answer. She ate a forkful of pasta. "When?" she said. "November," Vivian said. "I have the tickets." Ellie looked at her sharply. "You already have tickets?" "I got them early," Vivian said, without elaborating. Ellie looked at her father. He was looking at Vivian with an expression that Ellie, at 8 years old, could not have named precisely, but that she understood was significant in the way significant things were usually quiet. "Okay," Ellie said. She reached into the paper bag from the bakery and pulled out an almond pastry. "Good," she said, and ate it. Later, after Ellie was in bed, Vivian stood at the kitchen sink rinsing plates in the unhurried way of someone who wasn't looking for the door. Grayson stood beside her drying. They were not touching. The kitchen was warm with the smell of garlic and dish soap, and the rain had started up again outside, and the whole thing was so ordinary that it had its own weight to it, the particular gravity of a small routine that was becoming a thing between them. "She knew about the tickets," Vivian said. "She knows most things," he said. She didn't seem surprised. "She's been hoping for this for a while," he said. "She's just..." He thought about how to put it. "She's like me. She doesn't push. She waits and sees." Vivian handed him the last plate. "She's better than both of us," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "She is." Vivian dried her hands on the dish towel. She turned to face him, leaning back against the counter the way she'd sat on it Friday morning. The running clothes version of her, except now it was Tuesday evening, and she was in the blazer she'd worn to work, and she'd taken her shoes off at the door, and she looked like something between the two versions. Not quite the office, not quite the early morning, somewhere in the middle. "I need to say something," she said. He set the plate down. "Okay." "I've been thinking about the 4 months," she said, "the ones we lost because neither of us said anything. And I've been thinking about the letters, and the photograph, and the things your sister knew, and my sister knew, and we somehow both managed to not know." She paused. "And what I keep coming back to is, I don't want to waste any more of it. Being careful." She held his eyes. "I'm not saying we have to be anything right now that we're not ready to be. I know you're still landing. I know there's a lot of re-entry." She paused. "But I want you to know that I'm not going to manage this anymore. I'm not going to wait for the right moment or the right conditions or until I'm sure I'm not going to say the wrong thing." "Vivian," he said. "I love you," she said. Third time. Each time cleaner than the last. "And I'm telling you while you're standing in front of me, not writing it in a letter I'm going to put in a box." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "I know you do." He took one step toward her, closing the space between them to something small. "And I need you to hear me say it back before you have to write it in another letter." She looked up at him. "I love you," he said. First time. No qualifier, no build-up, no 8 months of context.
Just the plain fact of it, the way he said everything when it mattered. I have for a while. I was just being careful about the timing, which was the wrong call. She held his eyes. Yes, she said. It was. I know. He raised his hand to her face the same way he had on Friday, his thumb against her cheekbone, the brief, deliberate fact of it. But we're here now. She turned her face slightly into his hand, a small, involuntary thing she didn't seem to notice she'd done. We're here now, she said. Outside, the rain came down steady over Portland, and the city moved through its Tuesday evening, and in apartment 8A, the kitchen light stayed on until late, not because anything dramatic was happening, but because neither of them was in a hurry to leave it. Margot Ashcroft arrived on a Saturday. She texted Vivian from the parking garage at 11:15. I'm here. I'm bringing lunch. Please don't make it weird. And Vivian had looked at the text for a moment before showing it to Grayson with no expression. She's bringing lunch, Vivian said. That's a good sign, he said. She always brings food when she thinks she's in trouble. It's a displacement behavior. Still means we get lunch. Vivian put her phone down. She had been preparing for this visit the way she prepared for difficult board meetings. Not by rehearsing what she would say exactly, but by getting clear on what outcome she actually wanted and working backward from there. The outcome she wanted was simple. She wanted her sister to understand that what she'd done had crossed a line, and she wanted that acknowledged directly, and then she wanted to move past it. She was not interested in a prolonged confrontation. She had not, in 30 years of being Margot's sister, found prolonged confrontations with her to be productive. What she hadn't fully accounted for was Ellie. Ellie had been told, in the simple terms an 8-year-old required, that Vivian's sister was coming and that she had been the one sending the mysterious messages. Ellie had processed this for approximately 30 seconds and then said, she was trying to help, she just did it sneakily, with the tone of someone who had resolved the ethical question to her own satisfaction and was moving on. Grayson had said, that's more or less right, and Vivian had said, it's more complicated than that, and Ellie had said, is it? In a way that made both adults briefly reconsider their positions. So when Margot knocked at 11:30 with a bag of deli sandwiches and a slightly defensive expression and the general bearing of someone who had been rehearsing their own apology for a week, what she did not expect was to open the door and find a small girl with dark braids looking up at her with frank, assessing eyes. You're Margot, Ellie said. I am, Margot said carefully. You sent the messages. I did. Ellie considered her. Do you like sandwiches? Yes, I brought sandwiches. Good, Ellie said. Come in. And she stepped back and walked to the kitchen table with complete confidence that the situation was now under control. Margot stood in the doorway looking slightly undone by this. Vivian appeared from the hallway, and Margot looked at her with an expression that was equal parts guilt and something almost like wonder. She's terrifying, Margot said quietly. She's 8, Vivian said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Batina. Grayson came in from the kitchen, and Margot went still for a moment in the way people sometimes went still around him. He'd learned early in his adult life that he had a physical presence that registered before he intended it to. Something about height and the particular stillness of someone trained to stay quiet in uncertain spaces. He made a point of putting his hands in his pockets and standing loose. Hi, Margot, he said. Hi, she said. Very small, same as on the phone. Then, in a single rapid sentence, I owe you an apology and I want to give it to you properly. And I also want to say that I don't regret what I did, even though I regret how I did it. And I understand if that's a complicated thing to hear. He looked at her for a moment. She was taller than Vivian, broader in the shoulder, with dark hair cut short and sharp eyes that were currently doing the anxious work of watching his face for cues. She looked like someone who made decisions quickly and spent a lot of time afterward wondering if they were right. Come have lunch, he said. She exhaled. Okay. The sandwiches were good. Ellie ate half of hers and the second half of Margot's with Margot's full permission, which Ellie accepted without ceremony. The conversation over lunch was careful at first, Margot asking about Ellie's school, Ellie answering in detail, Grayson asking questions about the drive up from Eugene,
And then Ellie finished eating and asked to be excused and went to her room with a book, and the four of them were left at the table with the comfortable fiction of small talk no longer available. Margot looked at Vivian. "I read all of them," she said. "I know you know that. I want to say it directly because I think you deserve to hear me own it directly." She folded her hands on the table. "I went looking because I was worried about you, and I found the shoebox, and I opened it because She paused. "Because I'm me. Because I have never in my life left something alone that I thought I needed to understand." She looked at her hands. "And I read them, all 43. And then I sat on Grayson's bedroom floor for a while and felt a lot of things." "What things?" Vivian said. Her voice was measured. "Sad things. That you'd been carrying all of that by yourself." Margot looked up. "You could have told me, Viv. Any of it. I'm not... I know I push. I know I'm a lot. But I'm your sister. You could have said something." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I know I could have. But you didn't." "But I didn't." They looked at each other. The specific look of two people who have known each other longer than they've known anyone else, who have an entire language of history underneath every surface conversation, and who are currently choosing how much of that to access. "I sent the March letter because it was the most honest thing you'd ever written," Margot said. "Not the most articulate. There were more polished ones. But that one was just, it was you without the management. It was you saying exactly what you felt without dressing it up." She looked at Grayson. "I thought if he read it, he'd come home understanding something he didn't know before." "He didn't read it," Vivian said. "I know that now." Margot exhaled. "I didn't know that then. I thought..." She stopped. "I thought I was solving something. I thought if I just got the information to the right place, the situation would resolve itself." She shook her head slightly. "I'm aware that was presumptuous. I'm aware I treated your private correspondence like a problem I'd been contracted to fix." "A supply chain analogy," Vivian said dryly. Margot winced. "I walked into that one." "You walked into several," Vivian said. "The box in the coat closet, the index card." I know. Margot pressed her hands flat on the table. "The index card was too much. I knew it when I left it. I did it anyway because I was frustrated that I hadn't heard anything, and I didn't know if it had even been received, and I just wanted..." She stopped herself. "There's no version of this where my reasoning sounds better than my behavior, so I'm going to stop trying to explain it and just tell you I'm sorry. Both of you. What I did was wrong in method, even if I still believe it was right in intent." A silence. Grayson looked at Vivian. She was looking at her sister with the expression she wore when she was processing something she'd already partially processed and was now finishing the work. He'd learned that expression. He knew what usually came after it. "I'm still angry," Vivian said. "I know," Margot said. "You went into his space without permission. You went through my things. You sent correspondence on my behalf without telling me. Those are serious things, Margot. They're not nothing." "They're not nothing," Margot agreed. "And I need you to understand why each of those things matters specifically and not just acknowledge the general concept of having crossed a line." Margot nodded. She was not defensive. To her credit, Grayson thought, she was sitting with it without trying to negotiate her way to a smaller version of the mistake. "Tell me," she said. So Vivian told her. She was precise and specific in the way she was precise and specific at work. Not emotional, not circling, just naming the thing directly. The violation of Grayson's space. The removal of her own agency in a situation she'd been navigating carefully and in her own time. The months of anonymous messages that had added anxiety to an already complicated situation. The way being confronted with what Margot had done had forced both of them into a conversation that Vivian had wanted to have on her own terms. Margot listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt. When Vivian finished, she sat for a moment and then said, "You're right about all of it. I don't have a counter-argument for any of it. I'm sorry." Grayson watched Vivian receive this, the slight release in her shoulders, the thing that had been held carefully for a week beginning to loosen. "You also," Vivian said, "were the only person in my life who took it seriously, the thing I was feeling." She looked at Margot. "Everyone else either didn't know or didn't say anything. You pushed. You've been pushing for 3 years. A pause. I'm not saying the method was right, but the fact that you kept pushing because you thought it mattered, that counts. Margot's eyes went briefly very bright. She looked at the table. I got your voicemail, Margot said. The one you left in August. 3 a.m., you'd been up late working, and you said... She paused. You said you were tired of feeling like you were waiting for your own life to start. Vivian was quiet. I know you don't remember leaving that voicemail, Margot said. You called me on a bad night and you talked for 4 minutes, and I listened to it 6 times. She looked up. I kept it. I still have it. A pause. That was when I decided I was going to do something, even if it was wrong. A long silence. I'm going to be angry at you for a while longer, Vivian said. I know. And then I'm going to be done being angry because you're my sister, and I don't know how to sustain being angry at you for more than about 3 weeks. Margot made a sound that was mostly a laugh. That's historically accurate. And then we're going to talk about appropriate boundaries with regard to my personal life. Also fair. And you're going to stop calling Becca to check on the situation. Margot went slightly still. She told me, Vivian said, last Tuesday. Margot. Okay, Margot said. Okay, I'll stop calling Becca. Grayson stood up and started clearing plates because the conversation had reached a natural resting point, and also because he'd been a third party to a piece of sibling business that was mostly resolved and the kitchen needed someone's attention. From behind him, he heard Margot say, more quietly, Is it good? Actually good, not just resolved? And Vivian's voice, quiet and direct, Yes, it's good. He's good? He's standing right there. I know, I'm asking you. A pause. Yes, Vivian said. He's good. Grayson ran the water and did not comment. Margot stayed for 3 hours. By the end of the second hour, she and Ellie were on the living room floor with a drawing project that Ellie had proposed and Margot had agreed to with the slightly overwhelmed energy of an adult who had not anticipated being recruited by a child but had found themselves unable to decline. They were drawing a map of an imaginary country. Ellie's idea, highly specific geography requirements, Margot executing faithfully while Ellie directed. Grayson sat in the kitchen doorway watching this, and Vivian came and leaned against the wall beside him. She likes her, Vivian said. Ellie likes everyone who does what she says, he said. That's not true. She doesn't like everyone. She likes people who take her seriously and do their part, he amended. Margot is doing her part. They watched Margot carefully draw a mountain range in the location Ellie had specified, with a level of attention that suggested she had decided the least she could do, after everything, was be excellent at the map. She's going to name a city after you, Vivian said. What? The country. She told me this morning. There's going to be a city called Graysonville. He looked at her. She told you. In complete seriousness, Vivian said. I was instructed not to tell you because she wanted it to be a surprise, so please look surprised when it comes up. He looked back at Ellie and Margot on the floor. What about you? Do you get a city? Vivian was quiet for a moment. She said I get the capital, she said. She said capitals are for people who are always there. He looked at her. She was watching Ellie with her arms crossed and her shoulder against the wall, and her face doing the thing it did, the unguarded thing, the version no one at Ashcroft Industries would have recognized. She was not watching Ellie with the careful warmth of someone performing affection. She was watching her the way you watch something you love when you're not thinking about the fact that you love it, when it's just a fact of your landscape. He thought about what Ellie had said. Capitals are for people who are always there. She's right, he said quietly. Vivian looked at him. About the capital, he said. She held his eyes for a moment. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with the expression he'd come to understand was what she looked like when she was letting something land instead of stepping around it. Well, the week before Ashland, Grayson went back to work. It was not dramatic. He drove to the nonprofit's office, met with his director, sat through a reintegration meeting that was mostly bureaucratic and partly genuine,
and agreed to a 2-week reduced schedule before returning to full hours. His director, a woman named Clara, who had been running the organization for 11 years and had a talent for getting directly to the useful part of any conversation, asked him how he was doing in the way that meant she actually wanted to know. "Readjusting," he said. "That takes time." "I know." He looked at his hands. "It's better than I expected, honestly. I have things to come back to." She didn't ask him to elaborate. That was one of the things he'd always respected about Clara. She understood the difference between available information and needed information, and she didn't push past the line. He worked 3 days that first week and found that the work, which had always grounded him, still did. He was a trauma response coordinator. He drove to hospitals. He sat with people who had been through things. He helped them identify next steps and available resources. It required presence. It required the ability to be in a room with someone in crisis without making the crisis about yourself. He was good at it in the way he'd been good at field medicine. Not because the work was easy, but because the work required the specific thing he'd learned to do, which was to make himself as useful as possible and then step back. He came home the first Tuesday to find Vivian at the kitchen table with her laptop open and Ellie doing homework across from her, and Vivian had looked up and said, "There's food," with the casualness of someone who had not thought twice about being there. And Ellie had said she made the pasta again, with a tone suggesting this was a development she approved of, and he'd set down his bag and sat at the table and eaten pasta. That was better than his pasta, and not said anything for a few minutes, because there was nothing that needed to be said. It was the third time that week Vivian had been there when he came home. She still lived in 8B. This was a thing they had not directly discussed, the logistics of what they were, of where things were going, of what the practical architecture of a future looked like. He was not ready to discuss it, and he thought she wasn't either. And in the meantime, she came for dinner and sometimes stayed until Ellie was asleep, and sometimes stayed later than that. And on Saturday mornings, she knocked at 7:40 because the coffee was better in 8A, and none of it was formal or declared. It was just what was happening. He noticed that Ellie never asked whether Vivian was coming. She always just asked when. He noticed that Vivian no longer paused in the doorway when she arrived. She came in the way people come into places they know. He filed these things in the same place he'd been filing things about her for a year, in the place where he kept what mattered. The Friday before the Ashland trip, Grayson found the 43 letters on his kitchen table. He'd come home from work late. A call out at a hospital in southwest Portland had run past 7, and the apartment was quiet, Ellie asleep, and on the kitchen table in a neat organized stack was the entire correspondence. Every envelope. A small post-it on top. "I thought you should have them. All of them. If you want them. V." He sat down. He read them in order, which took over 2 hours. He made a cup of tea somewhere around letter 20 and let it go cold and didn't notice until he was on letter 35. He read all 43. The early ones that were careful and newsy. The December one that was funny in a dry way she'd probably not intended to share. The February snowman letter he'd already heard. The March one, which was the one Margot had mailed, and which was, as Margot had said, the least managed of all of them. And the later ones, the ones from June and July and August, when she'd stopped even pretending she was writing about anything other than what she was writing about. The last letter was dated September 14th, 3 weeks before he came home. September 14th. "Ellie told me today that she thinks you're going to like who she's become while you were gone. She said it exactly like that. I think he's going to like who I've become." And I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about it. The particular confidence of that. The idea that becoming something is not an apology, but a report. I've been thinking about that in relation to this. All of this, the writing, the not sending, the waiting. I've been treating it like a failure of nerve, like the proof that I'm not as certain of myself as I need to be. But Ellie made me wonder if it's just what becoming looks like sometimes. Slow and private and full of things you're not ready to say yet. I'm almost ready. I think by the time you get back, I'll have figured out how to say it out loud. Come home. V. He sat with the last letter for a long time. Then he took out his field journal and found the page where he'd written the one line. I looked back. "I just didn't know you were watching." And he wrote below it, She was almost ready. She got there. He closed the journal. He put the letters carefully back in the envelope stack and carried them to his room and set them on the nightstand next to the November letter, where they fit like they'd always been going to end up there. Ashland on a Saturday in November was cold and bright, the kind of day the valley did well. Clear sky, frost on the grass in the morning that burned off by 10, the smell of wood smoke from somewhere. They'd driven down the night before and stayed at a small inn on the edge of town that had creaky floors and a breakfast that Ellie rated highly based on the quality of the toast. Vivian had the map, the hand-drawn one from the shoebox with the red X on the corner. She'd kept it without saying anything about keeping it, and when Grayson had picked up Ellie's backpack that morning and reached for the printed directions on his phone, Vivian had said, "I have it," and pulled the map from her jacket pocket. He'd looked at her. "It's accurate," she said, slightly defensive. "I know it's accurate," he said. "I looked it up." She folded the map and kept it in her hand. The bookshop was exactly what he'd imagined from the satellite view. Small, independent, the kind of place that had been there long enough to feel like a neighborhood organ rather than a retail choice. A hand-painted sign. A window display of children's books, and what appeared to be a curated section on local history. A bell over the door that rang when they pushed in from the cold. Ellie went directly to the children's section with the purposeful air of someone who had been planning this. Grayson followed Vivian to the coffee side through the connecting door, and they stood at the counter ordering in the comfortable way of two people who knew what the other one wanted. She ordered his coffee before he got to it. He noticed. She noticed him noticing. "You take it the same way every time," she said. "I know. I'm not complaining." They took their coffees to a small table by the window. 2 chairs, a view of the street corner, the November light coming in at an angle that made everything look slightly warmer than it was. Ellie was visible through the connecting door, crouched in front of a low shelf, pulling out a book to examine and then replacing it with precision. "You drew the X on this corner specifically," he said. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I came here in June," she said, "for the site visit. I had an afternoon free, and I walked around, and I ended up here, and I sat at this table." She looked at the table as if confirming it was the same one. "And I thought, this is the kind of place you'd like. And then I thought," she paused. "And then I thought about Ellie wanting to see the theater, and I thought about how I could suggest it, and I thought about you not being home for another 2 months, and I ordered another coffee and made the map anyway." She paused, "because it felt better to plan it than to not plan it." "Yeah," he said. Which is exactly who you are," he said. Not gently, not pointing it out as a correction, just stating it. "You plan things. You plan ahead, you prepare, you put the red X on the map while the person's still on another continent." She looked at him. "That sounds like a gentle way of saying I'm controlling." "It sounds like a way of saying I know you." He held her eyes. "I know you. I've been paying attention." He set his cup down. "You ordered my coffee before I said anything. You showed up with the tickets when Ellie needed them. You have the map in your jacket pocket because you've had it for months, and it meant something to you. These are not flaws. They're you." She was quiet for a moment. "You make it sound better than it feels from the inside," she said. "That's what other people are for," he said, "seeing the outside of a thing." From the other room, Ellie appeared in the doorway holding a book with both hands and a look of intense intent. "This one," she said, bringing it to the table and setting it down in front of them. It was a novel, a thick one, with a cover illustration of a girl standing at the edge of something vast. "But I want your opinion first," she told Vivian, "before I get it." Vivian picked it up. She read the back cover. She read the first page. She handed it back. "Get it," she said. Ellie looked at her father. He nodded. She went back through the doorway at a brisk walk that was almost a run, but maintaining the dignity of not running in a bookshop. Grayson looked at Vivian. "You read the first page." "I needed to know if the writing was good. In 30 seconds. I'm fast." He looked at her for a moment. She was watching Ellie through the doorway, that unguarded thing on her face again, the thing she didn't know she did. "Vivian," he said. She looked at him. "I want to stop doing this," he said. She went still. "Stop doing what?"
The adjacent thing. The dinners and the mornings and the keys and the parallel lives. He held her eyes. I want to stop being the person next door and start being the person. He paused. I'm not saying move in tomorrow. I'm not saying anything has to change architecturally right now. I'm saying I want this to be what it is, officially, without any more of the waiting. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, Ashland moved through its Saturday in the November light, and the cold pressed against the glass, and inside it was warm and smelled like coffee and old books, and the particular Saturday feeling of a day with no agenda but this. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. That's it? She said. That's it, he said. We don't have to make it complicated. She looked at him. Something loosened in her face, not dramatically, just the last small thing that had still been held at a careful distance letting go. No, she said. We don't. Ellie came back with the book and 17 questions about the Shakespeare Festival afternoon, and Grayson answered the ones he knew, and Vivian answered the ones he didn't, and they finished their coffees and walked out into the Ashland afternoon together. Ellie between them talking about the book's first paragraph, which she had already read standing in the store, Vivian with the hand-drawn map in her jacket pocket still, Grayson with his hands in his coat and the particular steadiness of a man who had spent a long time learning how to be still under pressure and had just found, finally, the right place to stand. The red X on the corner had been exactly where the map said it was. He thought she would have wanted to know that. Then he looked at her, and she was looking at the corner with a small private expression, the one she got when something landed right, and he understood she already did. The thing about a year is that it doesn't feel like a year while you're inside it. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like the particular morning where Ellie can't find her left shoe, and Vivian is already on a call, and Grayson is making breakfast with one hand and looking under the couch with the other. It feels like the specific Saturday in February where it snowed unexpectedly and they hadn't planned for it and ended up spending the entire day inside making soup from whatever was in the kitchen and watching old movies and going to bed early because there was nothing else to do and nothing else needed doing. It feels like small arguments about reasonable things and unreasonable things and the kind of tiredness that comes from two people and a child sharing a life, which is different from all other kinds of tiredness because it is chosen and therefore bearable. And sometimes, on the better days, it is not tiredness at all, but ballast. A year. Grayson understood this only afterward, looking back at the accumulated weight of ordinary days and realizing that ordinary done consistently was the whole thing. That was what people didn't tell you. They told you about the dramatic moments, the decisions and declarations, and the turns that changed everything. Nobody talked enough about the Tuesday mornings, the left shoe, the soup from whatever was in the kitchen. Those were the year. Those were all of it. In December, 3 months after he came home, Vivian's lease on 8B expired. The building manager sent the renewal notice in the second week of the month, and it sat on Vivian's kitchen counter for 4 days before she picked it up and showed it to Grayson without saying anything, the way she sometimes presented him with information and let him respond without directing what the response should be. He looked at it. He looked at her. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to know what you think," she said. "That's not what I asked." She set the notice down. "I want to not renew it," she said. "I want to stop having a separate place where I go to sleep sometimes and keep my work clothes." She paused. "But I don't want to assume that's—" "Move in," he said. She looked at him. "Move in," he said again. Same tone, the steady, certain way. "Ellie's going to ask where your stuff is if you don't." "She already asks," Vivian said. "She asked me last week why I don't have a toothbrush here." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I keep it in 8B because sometimes I work late and don't want to wake anyone up." "Did she buy that?" "She said," Vivian told him, "you could just be quiet," with an expression suggesting she had found the argument irrefutable. He almost laughed. "So she's already decided." "She decided approximately 6 weeks ago." Vivian folded the renewal notice in half. "I'm not asking you to do this because it's practical or because Ellie wants it or because the lease is expiring. I want to be clear about that." "I know. I'm asking because I want to live here," she said. "With you. With Ellie. I want this to be the place I come home to." She held his eyes. "That's the only reason." He crossed the room.
He stood in front of her and took the folded notice from her hand and dropped it on the counter and held her face between both palms the way he'd learned she needed sometimes. Not to be kissed or reassured, but just to be held still for a moment, to have someone else provide the edges for a second. "Don't renew the lease," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. "Okay." "Okay," he said. She moved in over the following 2 weekends with the help of 2 movers and Margot, who had driven up from Eugene with more energy than the situation required and who had immediately begun reorganizing Vivian's closet space in ways that Vivian found both unnecessary and secretly correct. Ellie supervised operations from the hallway with the authority of someone who had been waiting for this outcome and felt entitled to some administrative role in its execution. "That lamp goes in the living room," Ellie told the movers. "Ellie," Grayson said. "It does, though," Vivian said. "She's right." The lamp went in the living room. January was hard. Not dramatically hard. Not the kind of hard that breaks things or requires decisions. Just the daily grinding kind. Grayson went back to full hours at the nonprofit, and 2 of his caseload situations were heavy and protracted, the kind that required him to be completely present at work and left him depleted when he came home. Vivian's Cincinnati bid situation, which had been resolved in October, resurfaced with new complications involving a subcontractor dispute, and she spent 3 weeks in back-to-back damage control mode that meant long days and short nights, and the particular mood she got when she was running on professional adrenaline and not enough actual food. They were both tired and occasionally short with each other in the way that tired people are short with the people they are safest with. He snapped at her once about something involving the kitchen, a small thing, a miscommunication about what was in the refrigerator, and then stood in the hallway afterward feeling like an idiot while she was very quiet in the kitchen for a few minutes. He went back in and said, "That was unfair," and she said, "Yes, it was," and they stood on either side of the kitchen island looking at each other, and he said, "I'm worn down," and she said, "I know, so am I." And that was the whole argument. 12 minutes start to finish, resolved not because anyone had won, but because they'd both decided the thing wasn't worth the energy. He thought about that later. About how different it was from other arguments he'd had in other kitchens in previous years. The way they both knew, without discussing it, that being tired was not the same as being wrong about each other. That a bad week was not evidence of a bad decision. Vivian seemed to understand this instinctively. Or maybe she'd learned it in her own way, through the years of managing things too tightly and paying the cost. She knew the difference between a problem with the relationship and a problem that happened inside the relationship. He'd had to learn that distinction the hard way in the years before, in the marriage that had ended not with a single wrong turn, but with the accumulated weight of too many small misidentifications. He'd learned it. He carried it. In February, Ellie had a bad week at school, a falling out with Danny that started over the classroom fish and expanded into the larger territory of 9-year-old social politics in ways that neither Grayson nor Vivian entirely followed. She came home on a Thursday silent and furious in the specific way of someone who is holding a lot and waiting to see if it's safe to put it down. Grayson sat with her after dinner. He didn't push. He had always done this well, giving her the room to arrive at it herself, not filling the silence with his own anxiety about the silence. She came out with it eventually, in pieces, and he listened to the pieces without trying to reassemble them into something fixable before she was done. When she was done, he said, "That sounds really hard." "It is," she said. "Do you want my opinion on what to do?" She thought about it. "Not yet." "Okay." She sat beside him for a while. Then she said, without looking up, "Did you talk to Vivian when things were hard while you were away?" He paused. "No," he said. "I didn't know she wanted me to." "That was dumb," Ellie said. "Yes," he agreed. "She would have listened." "I know that now." Ellie considered this. "I think you should talk to people when things are hard," she said, "even if you're not sure they want to listen, because usually they do." He looked at her. At the side of her face, the set of her jaw, the 9-year-old's absolute certainty about a thing she'd arrived at on her own. "You're right," he said. "I know." She leaned her head slightly against his shoulder. The small concession that meant the worst of it had passed. Can I talk to Vivian about the Danny thing later? Yeah, he said. She'd want you to. She went and found Vivian in the study, and Grayson stayed on the couch and listened to the muffled sound of Ellie's voice beginning to come back to itself, the way it did when she felt heard, and he thought about what she'd said. Usually, they do. He'd built a career on helping people in crisis say the things they were afraid to say. He'd been good at encouraging other people toward honesty for years before he'd figured out how to practice it himself. Ellie had figured it out at 9. Brian, March brought something unexpected. The nonprofit received a significant funding injection from a private donor, which meant an expansion of services, which meant they needed a new coordinator for the South Side. Clara asked Grayson if he wanted to lead the expansion. It was a larger role, more administrative, more managerial, less field work. And his first instinct was to say no because the field work was the part he was good at. And then he sat with it for 2 days and talked to Vivian about it one night after Ellie was asleep, and she said, "What are you afraid of?" "I'm not afraid," he said. She waited. "I'm good at the direct work," he said. "I don't know if I'm good at the other kind." "The other kind being?" "Managing people, setting direction, the larger picture stuff." She looked at him with the expression that meant she was deciding whether to say the direct thing or the diplomatic thing, and had concluded the direct thing was more useful. "You spent 8 months coordinating a multi-team humanitarian operation in 3 regions under adverse conditions," she said. "Managing a team of trauma coordinators in Portland is not outside your capacity." "That's different." "Why?" He thought about it. "Because in the field you're managing toward a clear objective. It's physical. You can see what's working." "You can see what's working in this too," she said. "It just takes longer." She shifted to face him more directly. "Grayson, you have never, in the time I've known you, done something because it was easy. You do things because they matter." She paused. "Does this matter?" He thought about Clara's office, about the South Side neighborhoods he drove through on call-outs, about what a consistent presence there could mean over time. "Yeah," he said, "it matters." "Then you already know the answer." He took the role. He told Clara the next morning. She looked unsurprised, which meant she'd known before he did. He started in April. It was harder than the field work in some ways, and more interesting in others. He made some mistakes in the first month, a scheduling decision that turned out to be wrong, a communication gap with one of his coordinators that he should have caught earlier, and he fixed them the way he fixed most things, by addressing them directly and moving on without extended self-criticism. The work slowly took the shape of something he was building rather than something he was responding to, and that was different in a way that suited him more than he'd expected. In May, Ellie turned 9 and requested a birthday situation that involved a picnic and not a party, which she explained was because parties required performing happiness, and picnics just required being there. Grayson and Vivian had looked at each other over this explanation with identical expressions, and Margot, who had driven up for the occasion, had said, "She's the most self-aware child I've ever met," in a tone that suggested equal amounts of admiration and concern. The picnic was in a park near the river on a Saturday that the Pacific Northwest produced occasionally, as if by accident, warm and clear and genuinely lovely. Becca came. Margot came. Ellie's friend Danny came, the falling out having resolved itself in the particular way of 9-year-old friendships, which was to say, suddenly and without discussion. There was a cake that Vivian had ordered from the bakery 2 blocks from the apartment, the good one, the one Ellie had strong opinions about. After the food and the cake and the river and the long afternoon light, Ellie sat between Grayson and Vivian on the picnic blanket and leaned back against Grayson's arm and said, with the satisfaction of someone conducting an inventory of their life and finding it acceptable, "This is a good birthday." "Yeah?" he said. "Yes." She paused. "Last year wasn't as good. You were gone." "I know. But this year is better." She looked at Vivian. "Because of before and now." Vivian looked at her. "What does that mean?" Ellie thought about how to explain it. "Because we had the before part," she said slowly, "where everything was still becoming, and now we have the now part, and having both parts makes the now part better." She paused. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Vivian said. "That makes sense." I thought of it myself, Ellie said. I know you did, Vivian said. Grayson looked past his daughter at Vivienne, at the afternoon light on her face, at the particular quality of her stillness, which was different from the stillness she brought to difficult situations at work, different from the contained stillness of the first night with the letters. This was the stillness of someone who had stopped bracing, who had set down what she'd been carrying and found, to her own surprise, that her hands were fine. He thought, this is what it looks like when someone stops waiting to see if the good thing will last long enough to be trusted. He had waited a long time to see it. In July, a Sunday in the third week, Grayson woke early because the light was coming in wrong. He'd forgotten to close the curtain all the way, and there was a bright strip of morning sun angling across the floor. He lay still for a moment, listening to the apartment, and what he heard was Vivian making coffee in the kitchen, the specific sounds of it, the grind and the fill and the tap of the spoon against the cup. And from somewhere further down the hall, Ellie talking to herself while she did something in her room, a low, continuous murmur that meant she was either reading aloud or working through a drawing with narration, which was a habit she'd had since she was 5. He lay still for a while. He thought about the van in April of the previous year, the 6 hours in the dark, the way the mind, when it has run out of procedures and logistics, goes looking for what it wants most. What it had wanted, this. Not a concept of this. Not a general idea of home and stability and people who stayed. This specifically. These sounds, the coffee smell, the murmur down the hall. He had not known, in the van, that this was the exact thing he was reaching for. He'd known there was something, some direction his mind kept returning to. He understood it more clearly now, from inside it, the way you understand a place better once you've been standing in it for a while. He got up. Vivian was at the coffee maker with her back to him when he came in, and she handed him a mug without turning around because she'd heard his footsteps and knew the pattern of his movement in the apartment the way he knew hers. He took the mug and stood beside her, and they looked out the kitchen window at Portland in early morning, which was gray and quiet and slightly damp, the way it often was. The way he'd come to understand was just the city's default register, rather than a mood. "You're up early," she said. "Light came in wrong. I told you to close that curtain." "I know." She drank her coffee. She was in pajamas, his old army hoodie over the top of them, the same one she'd been wearing the night he came home, which had completed its journey from his closet to her permanent wardrobe without either of them formally acknowledging the transfer. He had not asked for it back. He would not ask for it back. "What are you thinking about?" she said. "Last year," he said. "In April. The van." She went still slightly. "The extraction?" "Yeah." "What about it?" He turned the mug in his hands. "I was thinking about what I was thinking about then, in the 6 hours." He looked at the window. "I didn't know exactly what I was reaching for. I just knew there was a direction." He paused. "I know now." She looked at him. "It was this," he said. "This morning. The coffee sounds, Ellie's thing down the hall." He looked at her. "You." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window and then back at her coffee and then at him, and the morning light was the kind that made everything slightly more visible than it needed to be, and she was not performing composure or managing anything. She was just a woman drinking coffee in a kitchen, looking at a person she loved, with her face all the way open. "I didn't know it was going to be here," she said. "When I moved in next door. I told myself I had practical reasons." "I know." "I wrote 43 letters," she said. "I've read all 43. "I know you have." She looked at the counter for a moment. "I was thinking the other day about the first one, the one I wrote 10 days after you left. I wrote it at 2 in the morning because Elliot had a bad night and I was tired and I needed to tell someone." She paused. "I didn't know who else to tell." "You could have told Margot. Margot would have made it a project. She would have been right." "She would have been insufferable," Vivian said, but her mouth curved. "She would have been right and insufferable. Those coexist." He smiled. "She's coming for Ellie's school thing in September. She's already asked about the parking situation twice. She lives 2 hours away. She starts planning early.
Vivian set her mug down. She called me last week. She said she thinks I seem different. She paused. She said I seem like I stopped waiting for something. He looked at her. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, Vivian said, because I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Obviously. But she was right. She picked up her mug again, the fidget of someone who still found certain things easier to say while doing something with her hands. I spent a long time expecting the good things to come with a catch. That if something felt like what you actually wanted, there was probably a cost you hadn't found yet. She looked at him. I built a company that way. I ran my life that way. She paused. You're not a catch I haven't found yet. No, he said. You're also not uncomplicated, she said. You're stubborn, and you go quiet when you should talk, and you have a very strong opinion about the correct way to stack dishes that is not always correct. It is always correct. It's often correct, she said. Not always. We can agree to disagree. We absolutely cannot. But she was looking at him with the particular expression that meant she was happy and was not going to say it directly, but was also not going to hide it. And he had come to value that expression more than most things. What I mean is, I know who you are. I've been watching since before you left. I know the parts that are easy and the parts that aren't. She met his eyes directly. And I'm staying. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. Good, she said. Down the hall, Ellie's murmur stopped, and there was the sound of her door opening and her feet on the hallway floor, and a few seconds later she appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with her hair loose and a drawing in her hand. You're both up, she said. We are, Vivian said. Good. She came to the table and sat down and put the drawing in front of her. I finished the map last night, she said, of the country. I want you to see it. Grayson sat across from her. Vivian came around from the counter and looked over Ellie's shoulder. The map was large, 2 sheets of paper taped together, and detailed in the specific way of Ellie's drawings, which were never casual, always considered. Mountains in the northwest corner, a river running through the middle. Cities marked with small circles, and their names written in careful 9-year-old script. Grayson found Graysonville in the southeast, a medium-sized city near the coast. He did not say anything about it because he had been told not to look surprised, and he kept that agreement. He looked for the capital. It was in the center of the map, largest of all the circles, at the meeting point of the river and the main road. The name was written in slightly larger letters than the others. Vivian, it said. Vivian leaned in and read it and was quiet for a moment. That's the capital, Ellie said, pointing to it. I see that, Vivian said. Capitals are important, Ellie said. Everything connects through them. She looked up at Vivian. I named it after you because you're the one everything connects through. She said it simply, without performance, the way she said things she'd thought about carefully. In our family, everything kind of goes through you. Vivian straightened up slowly. She was not going to cry at a kitchen table at 7 in the morning in front of a 9-year-old. This was clearly a decision she was making in real time, and she made it successfully, though it was close. Thank you, she said. Her voice was even. Ellie nodded, satisfied, and looked at the map. There's also a small island off the coast, she said, that doesn't have a name yet. I'm still deciding. Take your time, Grayson said. I will, she said seriously. Naming things matters. He looked at Vivian over Ellie's head. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. Buzz. In October, exactly 1 year from the night Grayson had come home and found his bedroom full of unsent letters, he did a thing he had been planning for 3 months. He did not plan it the way Vivian planned things. Not the red X on the map, not the purchased tickets, not the box of carefully assembled intentions. He planned it the way he did most things. He decided, and then he thought about what the decision required, and then he did the work quietly until it was done. He called Margot in August. He had called her 3 times since October, once after she'd visited, once about logistics for Ellie's school thing, once on a Sunday, for no particular reason that had turned into an hour-long conversation about Vivian's early life, that he hadn't asked for but that had given him things he was grateful to know. She had gone from someone he was willing to forgive to someone he actually liked,
which was a development he suspected she had planned on her own timeline. I want to ask her, he said, but I want it to be right. Right how? Margot said. Not a production, he said, not a performance. She'll hate a performance. She will absolutely hate a performance, Margot confirmed. She'll be polite about it and then tell me on the phone afterward that it was uncomfortable. So nothing with an audience. Nothing with an audience, Margot agreed. Nothing that requires her to perform a reaction. A pause. She's going to want to say yes, Margot said. She's already going to know the answer before you finish asking, so whatever you do just has to give her a moment, a real one, just between you. He thought about that. Okay, he said. Okay, Margot said. And Grayson? Yeah. She's been waiting for this her whole life, Margot said. Not for the ring, for the fact of it. Someone choosing her completely. A pause, and her voice had something rough in it that she smoothed over quickly. She was never good at believing she was the kind of person someone would choose all the way. She's better now. But she still needs to know it. He sat with that for a moment. I know, he said. I know that. He chose a Tuesday in October. No occasion, no reservation. After dinner, after Ellie was in bed, when the apartment was quiet and the two of them were doing the thing they did on Tuesday evenings, she was at the table with something from work. He was on the couch with a book he wasn't really reading, and the rain was going outside, the Portland October rain, steady and ordinary. He got up. He went to the bookshelf. He had put it there 3 weeks ago, behind a row of books, in a small box. He took it out. He walked to the table. She was reading something on her laptop, and she looked up when his footsteps stopped beside her, and then she looked at the small box in his hand, and she was very still. Grayson, she said. Yeah, he said. What is that? You know what it is. She looked at it. She looked at him. Her face went through several things very quickly and settled into something he had never quite seen before. Not the boardroom stillness, not the unguarded watching Ellie expression, not the way she looked in the mornings or the way she looked in difficult moments. Something new. Something that was all of those things and underneath them. He sat down in the chair across from her, not kneeling. He had thought about this. She would not want the theater of it. She would want to be eye level. She would want to be able to see his face clearly. I was thinking about the van, he said, in April of last year, and I was thinking about the first morning after I came home, when Ellie said you make better eggs than me, and she wasn't wrong, but I wasn't going to say that. He paused. And I was thinking about the photograph. Me at the airport, looking back. You behind a camera I didn't know was there. He paused. I looked back because I wasn't ready to stop. I didn't know that was what I was doing, but that was what I was doing. She hadn't moved. She was watching him with that open, unmanaged face. I'm not going to look back anymore, he said, because I'm not leaving. He opened the box. It was a simple ring. He had chosen it himself, and it was not elaborate, because she wore simple things, because what she valued was quality of material and precision of detail, not volume. She would know he'd looked. She would know he'd paid attention. I want to marry you, he said, not as a next step or a practical decision, because you are who I want. You are who I've been reaching toward since before I knew I was reaching. He held her eyes. Ellie named the capital after you because everything connects through you. She's 9 and she already knows it. I've known it for a while. He paused. So, do you want to? She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Yes, she said, not after a long pause. Not with deliberation, just the word, clean and immediate, the same way she'd said, I love you the 3rd time. Without managing it, without the armor, just the plain fact of it. He put the ring on her finger. Her hand was not quite steady. His wasn't either. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked at him. You did this on a Tuesday, she said. Tuesdays are good days. You chose a Tuesday specifically. I chose it because it was a regular evening, he said, and I wanted it to be regular. I wanted it to be the thing we do. Not a special occasion, but a Tuesday, our Tuesday, the kind we have every week. He paused. Because that's what I'm signing up for, not the occasions. The Tuesdays. She was quiet for a long moment. The Tuesdays, she said, every one of them. She looked at the ring again, and then looked at the window where the rain was doing its October thing, and she had the expression of someone who has spent a long time standing at a careful distance from the thing they wanted most, and has just, finally, stepped forward into it. "I'm going to tell Margot," she said. "I already told Margot." She stared at him. "When?" "August. You called my sister in August." "I needed information." "What information?" "About you," he said. "Things I wanted to know." She looked at him with an expression that was trying to decide between exasperated and moved, and was landing somewhere between both. "What did she tell you?" "Things," he said. "What things?" "That you've been waiting your whole life for someone to choose you all the way," he said. "That you were never good at believing you were the kind of person someone would do that for." Vivian was very still. "She's going to be so insufferable about this," she said. Her voice was not quite even. "Completely insufferable," he agreed. "She's going to say she told me so." "She did tell you so." "She's still going to be insufferable." "Yeah," he said. "Probably for years." He reached across the table and took her hand, the one with the ring, and held it. "It'll be fine." She looked at their hands. She exhaled slowly, the last of whatever had been held at careful distance finally releasing. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said. "I love you too." Down the hall, in the room with the angled nightlight, Ellie slept. On the bookshelf in the living room, 43 letters sat in a small, neat bundle tied with a piece of kitchen twine, not hidden, not displayed, just there, evidence of a thing that had happened, kept because it had mattered. Beside them, the November letter. The photograph, framed now, him at the airport looking back. Ellie's map of the imaginary country, tacked to the wall near the bookshelf where the capital was still marked in slightly larger letters than everything else. Outside, Portland did its October thing. Rain on the windows, the city moving through its Tuesday evening, the particular quiet of a building full of people going about their lives in the rooms they'd chosen. This was the part nobody told you about, the part that was not the declaration or the discovery or the moment everything changed, the part that was the morning after, and the morning after that, the accumulated weight of regular days, the Tuesday evenings, the coffee sounds, the child talking to herself down the hall. The part where you stop waiting for the good thing to come with a catch. The part where you learn that staying, actually staying, with your whole self, in a life you chose without the escape hatch of careful distance, is not a small thing. It is the thing. It is possibly the only thing that matters. And you can spend years being very smart and very capable and very good at managing outcomes and still not know how to do it until someone stands in a doorway wearing your old hoodie, surrounded by evidence of how much they have always been trying to find their way toward you, and you understand, finally, what you have both been reaching for. Grayson Hale had gone to a lot of places in his life. He had been useful in hard places, and he had come back from all of them, and he had made peace with the costs. He was not a man who expected the world to be easy or fair, or to make sense in the ways that mattered most. He had learned to do good work and come home and take care of the people in his care and ask for very little in return. He had not known how to ask for this. He was glad someone had kept the letters. He was glad someone had kept the photograph. He was glad that two sisters, one too controlling and one too careful, had been orbiting this particular center of gravity long enough for the thing to finally pull them in. On a Tuesday in October, with the rain on the windows and his daughter asleep down the hall, and the woman he was going to marry sitting across the table with a ring on her hand and the expression of someone who had stopped bracing for the catch, Grayson Hale sat still in the apartment that had become, by the slow accumulation of ordinary days, the life he had been reaching toward. He had looked back at the airport because he hadn't been ready to stop. Now he was facing forward, and the thing in front of him was everything. There is a version of this story where the letters get sent, where the timing is right and the words come out at the airport, and everything is clear from the start. That version exists. It might even be easier, but easier is not always what shapes us. Sometimes it's the long way, the unsent letters, the careful distance, the year of almost, that teaches us what we're actually willing to fight for, what we're willing to stand still for, what we're willing to say out loud when we finally stop being afraid of the answer. If there is someone you've been writing letters to in your head, say it. Not because the timing is perfect, not because you're sure, say it because the cost of not saying it is another year of letters you never send, and because the people worth reaching toward are almost always already reaching back. They're just waiting to see if you're going to look back.